Okay, Chair, we are now live.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam. And good evening and welcome to this Virtual Development Control Committee, and a special welcome to those members of the public watching on the Council's YouTube channel. Mobile phones, I'll just remind everybody in the meeting itself to please ensure your mobile phones are switched off or in silent mode for the duration of this meeting. I did remember to turn mine off about 10 or just a minute ago. Webcasting. This meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. A copy of the recording will be available on the channel shortly after the meeting. Members and officers are reminded to keep their microphones on mute unless they are called to speak. Members can indicate that they wish to speak using the meeting chat function. Please do not use that chat function to ask questions of officers or councillors because they won't be answered. So all you need to do is type a very short, just your first name or whatever you want to type into the chat function, and it will be picked up. Members of the public are reminded that the planning application process is constrained by the need to have regard of current planning policy at national, regional and local levels, as well as all other material planning considerations, including case law precedent. The decision-making process is often described as quasi-judicial because local planning authorities have to act reasonably within the bounds of planning law and the above considerations, and are not free to determine planning applications simply because of the weight of public opinion. Who is who here this evening? The elected councillors who are present remotely this evening are the members of this committee and will decide what action this committee takes on the issues it considers. We have a number of officers present whose cameras are mostly switched off and are here to advise the committee on issues before it. I will now introduce councillors and officers of the meeting. And when I call you, it will be good if you could just say good evening or whatever, so that members of the public can see you on the YouTube channel and everybody is clear who is who. So I'm now going to go through the list of councillors in alphabetical order. So, Councillor Roara.
Good evening, Chair.
Good evening, thank you. Councillor Kim Bailey.
Good evening.
Thank you. Councillor Patricia Bamford.
Good evening, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor David Cunningham. Are you there, David? I can see you.
Good evening.
Good evening, David. Good to hear from you. Councillor Lorraine Dunstan, who's Vice Chair.
Good evening, Chair.
Good evening, Lorraine. Councillor Simon Edwards.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. Councillor Leslie Heap.
Good evening, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Rebecca Mole.
Good evening.
And I'm Malcolm Self, and I chair this committee. Thank you. We've also got there might have been three. I missed Councillor Banyan. I do apologise. I really apologise for that. We've also got, and it's going to be last but absolutely not least, Councillor Mark Banyan.
Good evening, Chair.
And thank you for flagging that up to me. I'll take a slap on the wrist. We've also got with us just two councillors who are in fact ward councillors for the planning application we've got this evening. That's Councillor Andreas Kirsch.
Good evening, Chair.
Good evening. And Councillor Christine Stewart.
Good evening, Chair.
Thank you. And I think I'm just checking, Councillor Margaret Thompson had indicated that she might wish to join this meeting, but I can't see it on my screen. Is that right, Sam?
Yes, Chair. She doesn't seem to be present at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've also got some officers with us from Democratic Services. Is Sam Nichols, and he's our committee clerk, and ordinarily would be sitting by my side in the council chamber, taking notes, taking the minutes, and advising as necessary. So good evening, Sam.
Good evening, Chair.
And we've also got, I don't think we need for people to say good evening or hello, but we've got Gary Marson, Corporate Head of Democratic Services and Elections, Barry Lomax, Head of Development Management, Toby Feltham, Lead Planning Officer for Strategic Major Developments and Planning Delivery. I know that we've also got in the room with Barry and Toby, Karen Coles, another Senior Planning Officer. Tim Naylor is with us, who is Assistant Director of Strategic Planning and Infrastructure. And there are also, I did see, we've also got George Mann, or he was with us. He's from IT. He does a brilliant job, and it's just in case we get any technical issues. Thank you, George. I'm going to move on to public participation. There is a registration scheme for residents and applicants wishing to participate on the planning applications that are considered by this committee. Members of the public who have registered to speak will be contacted at the appropriate time, which is now actually, to notify them to join the meeting. If we are unable to get in contact with a member of the public and they are unable to join the meeting, then we will read out a statement that they put forward on their behalf. We've also got the two ward councillors that are not on this committee that I mentioned earlier are here this evening. There is provision under Procedural Rule 27 within the council's constitution to permit councillors who do not sit on a committee to address the committee if permission is granted by this committee. So we've received requests this evening from councillors Andreas Kirsch and councillor Christine Stewart. I take it all members are happy and for us to allow them to speak. If you're not, could you please type your name in the chat function? And I'll pause just a moment. And I think there are no names. I'm just checking. And there's no names, so that's fine. Thank you very much. Apologies for absence and attendance of substitute members. Sam.
Yes, Chair. We receive apologies from Councillor Kerr.
Thank you very much. And I think everybody else is in attendance, and in fact they are. At this point, we would normally refer to the minutes of the previous meeting. The minutes of the meeting that was held on the 21st of May, together with the minutes when they come from this meeting, will be taken to the next meeting for approval, because the minutes from the 21st of May meeting, which was only just under 2 weeks ago, have not yet been published. Declarations of interest. Do any members have any disclosable pecuniary interests and any other non-pecuniary interests, i.e. personal interests, relevant to items on this agenda? And I know that Councillor Trish Stanford has notified us that she wants to speak now.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I need to declare a personal interest as I'm a trustee for KSIL, that's Kingston Centre for Independent Living, who were one of the consultees for this planning application.
Thank you very much, Tricia. That's noted. And there's nothing else come up in the chat. So I'm taking that we've got that declaration and there are no others. Thank you very much. We now goes to the main item for this evening, the planning application. It's the reference number 19/02966, and it's for 11 to 25 Leatherhead Road, Chessington, and it is for the demolition of 8 existing residential dwellings and the erection of 43 residential units, a mixture of houses and flats, with associated car and cycle parking, landscaping and access works. I'm now going to turn to our Head of Planning, our Planning Officer, Barry Lomax, and he will present this item. I see his presentation. It's come up on my screen. Hopefully on everybody's screen to see his presentation. Over to you, Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the first application and only application this evening is at 11 to 25 Leatherhead Road. It is for the comprehensive redevelopment of the site. On screen now, you can see edged in red the site application site. And then here we have an aerial photograph showing the 4 pairs of semi-detached properties. A plan showing the location of the site in a wider context. And then we move into some plans showing first of all, the existing site plan and then some existing elevations. Moving now just to some photographs to give members some context of the site. This shows the application site and the extent of the site indicated in red. You'll see in the centre of the screen a bus stop. Then we see the site early from the south, now from the north. And then we see a photo montage of the site showing the different properties. If I take you now to some photographs which have been taken during the site visit, this shows the relationship between number 9 and number 11 Leatherhead Road. Again, showing that relationship in greater detail. As we're getting closer into the site between the 2 properties, and then looking at the other end of the site between number 25 and 27. And again, a corresponding photograph showing the space between those 2 properties. Now looking at some photographs of the rear gardens of the site, you see that the gardens are laid out as one would imagine gardens to be, each with a reasonable number of garden trees and shrubs, as you can see in the photographs. So if I take you now in slightly more detail, the application is for the demolition of the existing buildings on site and its comprehensive redevelopment for residential purposes. The proposal is for 47 residential units, of which 15 would be 1-bed, 11 would be 2-bedroom units, and 17 would be 3-bedroom. That's 40% of the overall total. The application includes the provision of 5 1-bed affordable units. They would be shared ownership units. The proposal includes car parking for 32 car parking spaces, all with active charging points, comprising 4 accessible spaces, and there would be 1 space reserved for an electric car club. There would be 84 cycle spaces, including 4 for visitors, and there would be 2 motorcycle spaces. On screen now, you can see the proposed site plan in some detail. This showing the proposal for a block of 2 apartment buildings at the front of the property, coming into a rear garden courtyard with residential properties surrounding a central area of amenity space. On screen now, you see a computer-generated image of 11 to 25 Leatherhead Road. This shows the scheme stepping up from the 2-storey properties into a 3-4-storey property. There is an area subterranean, as indicated on screen, and then again stepping down to the neighbouring properties. The next computer-generated image is from within the site, looking out to Leatherhead Road, showing that central amenity space and the front of the individual dwelling houses surrounding the courtyard, up to the perimeter of the courtyard. On screen now, you see a plan showing how the site would be accessed. You see a central access facility which takes you into the podium level. The ground does rise from the street to the rear of the properties on Leatherhead Road, for members who are familiar. The proposal includes for underground or semi-undercroft parking in this location. There'll be parking to the right and parking to the left, as indicated on screen, and there would be pedestrian access to the podium provided at the 2 points indicated on screen. There are proposed to be 3 lifts within the development which provide access to that podium area. Looking now in detail, showing some of the distances from the proposal to the elevations of neighbouring properties. Each of the separation distances are in line with the council's supplementary planning document on residential design. You see there is a significant distance across the road to the properties on the other side of Leatherhead Road, and then a similar distance of 40 to 50 metres to the rear. On this side, you see a separation distance of 9.5 metres to the boundary on the northern edge, around 8.6 on the southern edge, and ranging from nearly 40 metres to 47 metres on that boundary. If I take you now through the floor plans for the apartment elements of the development, this is the entrance from Leatherhead Road into the site, with car parking provided at either side. Pedestrian access provided down the routes is indicated on screen, with this route moving towards a platform lift. There are also lift points within the underground car park here and here. Cycle parking is also proposed to be included in this basement level. Now moving up to the ground floor, where we start to see the start of some residential accommodation, and also the top of that subterranean undercroft parking, which would be amenity space for some of the residents. Now onto the first floor, into the second floor. As we move into the second floor, you can see the shorter or the smaller units at either side dropping away, and then again into the third floor. Each of the flats in the apartments are provided with balcony access, some of the apartments having access to numerous balconies. Now looking at the courtyard in the centre, there are dwellings surrounding the central amenity space with parking provided for the units to the front of each unit. Looking now at the first floor plan, up to the second floor plan, and then to the roof. On screen now you see the sectional elevations showing the properties stepping up from their near neighbours on Leatherhead Road, terminating at their highest point in the middle. This shows the eaves and ridge height of neighbouring properties at 5.5, 8.6, 4.9 and 8.5. Then you see the properties increasing in height as you move to the centre, where at its highest it's around 13.6 metres. On screen now you see some sectional details cut through the centre of the site, and a range of those sectional details taken from different points within the development. If I take you now to the key areas of assessment as set out in the officer's report, looking firstly at housing delivery, members would be aware, like many other councils in the South East London area and indeed in England, we cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites. What does that mean in terms of planning? That means that the local authority would be within the tilted balance scenario, and the courts tell us that that is a fundamental requirement of planning policy, how we deal with that tilted balance. The members will see on the right-hand side of the screen an extract from the National Planning Policy Framework, which sets out what the tilted balance in planning parlance, in everyday speak, the presumption in favour of sustainable development means. What it means is set out here at paragraph 11D, part 2, which is the planning permission should be approved unless the adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the framework. This application would provide 43 residential units, a net gain of 35, of which 40% would be 3-bed units above the policy of 30%. Officers consider that the delivery of 43 homes at this stage, along with a significant proportion being family units, would garner significant weight in the proposal. Looking now at affordable housing, the application has been supported by a viability assessment. This has been independently assessed by consultants appointed by the council. The conclusions of that viability assessment are that the site could reasonably deliver 0 units in line with policy. That is as a result of the value of the site found in the 8 units and the build costs. Notwithstanding, the applicant is proposing 5 1-bed shared ownership units, equating to 11% of all units. Again, that would carry significant weight in the process. Looking now at amenity, members will be aware that national, regional and local planning policies taken together seek to ensure that development secures a good standard of amenity for existing and future occupants of land and buildings. In terms of the proposal, all of the proposed dwellings meet or exceed the London Plan space standards. All of the proposed dwellings will have access to private amenity space in line with RBK policy, policy being slightly more onerous than London Plan policies. There would be communal access to a green amenity space in the centre of the site, and the proposal would make a contribution of £20,000 towards infrastructure to be provided in the immediate vicinity of the site. On screen now, we have a plan setting out the sunlight and amenity to neighbouring gardens as of the 21st of March. What this plan shows is that all of the gardens indicated would have a little impact from the development on the 21st of March. As such, we wouldn't need to run a calculation for the summer months, as of course the sun would be higher. On screen now, you see the same assessment, but this time taken for the gardens of the proposed development, and you see that in the winter, on the left-hand side of your screen, parts of the development would not have 2 hours of sunlight, whereas in the summer months on the right-hand side, you'll see that all private gardens would have their hours of sunlight as per the BRE standards. On screen now, you see a plan setting out the distances between developments, or between this development and neighbouring properties, showing that the proposal exceeds the relevant guidance within the Royal Borough of Kingston's supplementary planning document on design. There's greater than 21 metres between habitable window to habitable window, and there is a separation distance greater than 7.5 metres between new development and the boundary of a neighbouring site. I have a few images here now that show the relationship of the proposed development to the two properties which it immediately neighbours. In this case, number 9, showing the proposal in relation to number 9. Here we see it in slightly more detail. And then the corresponding side at number 27, the separation distance indicated here about 3.2, dropping to 2.6 metres. And then we see the relationship in heights is reasonably comparable. And then an image showing the relationship, again, CGI of the proposed development and the neighbour. On screen now, you see a detail of that internal courtyard, which we provided for amenity space. There is outdoor play equipment, as indicated on screen. This is for younger years children, with older children being accommodated off-site in line with policy. If I now take you to the element of the development which looks over to the neighbouring property, this is the southern aspect of the inner courtyard development. This is indicating that this top window here is an obscurely glazed window serving an ensuite bathroom for the master bedroom, which is also on this level, but this is only an ensuite. This window here, which is masked by the tree in this image, is a landing staircase. And then we have a window here is indicated on screen, which is a bedroom, the smaller bedroom in the properties. The landscaping scheme has been designed so as to ensure that trees are placed in front of those bedroom windows. You might also see, and there's a plan in greater detail coming up, that each of these windows has a brise soleil detailing, which would be a build out on each of these windows. There is a greater detail coming up, and I'll be able to show you that shortly. So in conclusion, officers recognise that there are some impacts on amenities to neighbouring properties, and this is covered in paragraph 273 of the officers' report. Turning now to character and appearance, on screen you see the outline of the existing properties in yellow, and then you see behind the proposed development. At its highest point, there is a difference of around 5.13 metres between the existing and the proposed. And as set out in paragraph 273, officers consider that whilst the proposal would result in a high density residential development with some impact, it is albeit limited in terms of character and appearance. I'll now take you through some of the more detailed images around the site. Sorry that a word has been slightly cropped off, but these are some typical house details, again in slightly more detail. Looking through the material palettes of of brick with a metal windows. Getting slightly more detail on those materials. As you can see on screen here, here is an example of what that Brise Soleil sun shield would look like on those windows on the southern aspect. And then on screen now you see a set of photographs showing the variety of types of properties on Leatherhead Road. Although as set out in the officer's report, it is acknowledged that it is predominantly residential properties of 2 stories, but there are a variety of units as you travel up and down the Leatherhead Road. Now turning our attention to highway matters, the application site has a public transport accessibility level of 2, which is the lower end of the scale when measured between 1 and 6. The proposal will provide 32 car parking spaces, all with active charging points, 4 for accessible spaces, 1 space for electric car club. Members, future members, if the scheme is approved, would have membership to that electric car club. There would be cycle parking for 84 spaces, 4 of which would be for visitors. 2 motorcycle spaces would also be included. The transport assessment submitted with the application concludes that there would be a negligible increase in movement along the Leatherhead Road from this development in the AM and PM peaks. That has been assessed by the council's highway team and they raised no objections. At the bottom of the screen, you see an extract from the Transport for London's WebCat time mapping tool, which indicates the access to facilities from the development site using public transport in the AM peak. And that shows that the site is within 30 minutes of 8 educational facilities, 1 further education, 7 secondary, 5 primary schools within 15 minutes, 5 GP surgeries within 15 minutes, 13 GP surgeries within 30 minutes, and then pharmacies, 4 of which within 15 minutes, 3 metropolitan district or major centres within 30 minutes, a supermarket on the doorstep, Lidl, within 10 minutes, and then 2 railway stations, both of which accessed within 15 minutes. Further details with regards to highways is set out in the report, and I shall cover it in slightly more detail when we come on to the late material. Looking at tree and landscape, members will note that the gardens of which serve the 8 semi-detached properties are reasonably well treed in terms of presence of trees. The arboricultural assessment submitted with the application concludes that all of the trees to be removed, of which there's about 40 or 50, are of a category C or a category U, so the lower end of the scale. They are mostly ornamental garden trees or shrubs, which could be replaced to be of a higher standard. It is replacing on a roughly a 2-for-1 basis, so taking away the trees as indicated on the left-hand side of the site and propose to replace them with trees around the boundaries, along the front and in the centre of the site as indicated on screen. Turning now to matters of energy, the application proposes a reduction of 63.57% in emissions above Part L of the building regulations. The rest of the requirement to meet zero carbon would be in the form of a carbon offset fund of £58,590. That is in line with London Plan policies. Members may be interested to know that during the course of the application, officers have been working hard with developers to increase the energy performance of the building, and as a result, a scheme which originally had gas boilers serving the properties has now moved to a more sustainable air source heat pump proposal, which has had a significant benefit in terms of CO2 emissions. On screen now, this is, sorry, my slides have got slightly out of order. This is the landscaping proposal showing the landscaping of the inner courtyard and the CGI showing of the outer area. If I take you to the late material, which members would have been circulated or would be circulated to members, the first part of this material just sets out that since the publication of the officer's report, officers have had the opportunity to review a number of decisions made at the Secretary of State level and at the Planning Inspectorate level, and to ascertain or to get a feeling for how the Secretary of State is weighing up policies in the draft London Plan. that exercise has concluded that in instances where the Secretary of State is not proposing to make significant suggested modifications to any policies in the draft London plan, he is attributing significant weight to those policies, and I shall set that out in further detail in a moment. We've received additional representations from residents, and they've raised concerns about drainage and water storage, parking, overdevelopment, impact on daylight and sunlight, and right to light issues. The first 4 points are covered in the officer's report, and the final point about right to light, it's to be noted that that is a civil matter and is wholly separate from the normal daylight sunlight assessment which we would undertake as part of a planning process. There's also been an additional representation from Kingston Centre for Independent Living. They confirm they had some questions or issues raised yesterday about access to the development. That has now been clarified how access will be provided to the podium. They raised no objection to the development, subject to a condition requiring signage to aid those with mobility needs to be directed towards the lift accommodation. If I take you now through some quick amendments to reports and some other matters, there's an amendment to paragraph 261 of the report to cover the increase in 20,000 from £5,000 towards recreation and play equipment in Southall Borough. There is an update to the officer report in terms of ecology. This deals with paragraph 233. Members will note that paragraph 233 indicated that the applicants were carrying out a survey for great crested newts. They have done a survey, and that has concluded that the site does not contain such animals / creatures. Then we have an update on parking with regards to paragraph 183 to 200, and this goes back to the issue raised about the draft London plan. It's to be noted that policy T6 of the draft London plan directs that, and this is a quotation, motorcycle parking spaces should count towards the maximum for car parking spaces at all use classes. So the proposal does include 2 motorcycle spaces, which if we were using the draft London plan, that would increase the number of what would be deemed to be car parking spaces by 2. What we also have is an amendment to the officer report about parking in relation to policy T6, also indicating the maximum parking provision according to the draft London plan and taking into account the Secretary of State's modifications. That would indicate that the new London plan would be looking for a maximum parking provision of 36.5 spaces. The proposed scheme includes 32 spaces, 2 motorcycle spaces. So using that policy, there would be 34 spaces as opposed, or in contrast to the 36.5 as per the draft London plan. However, officers set this out as a range of maximum London plan of 36.5 to 43, and the current London plan has a maximum of 50 spaces. So on any measure, this site falls below the maximum number of spaces. Depending how you measure those spaces, it's either a couple of spaces or it is 18 spaces. This is reflected in the late material. We also have an amendment to paragraph 195. Apologies, paragraph 195 in the report was based on the earlier scheme of 45 units, not the later scheme. That would suggest that when you take into account census data, there is an under provision against that maximum figure of around 10. Now looking at policy T6 in slightly more detail, policy T6 identifies that car-free development should be the starting point for all development proposals in places that are well connected by public transport, with developments elsewhere designed to provide the minimum necessary, that is to be parking or car light. Policy T6 also goes on to say that the absence of local on-street parking controls should not be a barrier to new development, and boroughs should look to implement those controls wherever necessary. The application would make a contribution to a consultation and the implementation of the CPZ if that was necessary. There is an amendment to condition 33 to reflect the ecology report and update. There is an additional condition number 42 to address the concerns raised or the request of Kingston Centre for Independent Living. Taking all those things into account, Mr. Chairman, the recommendation is to grant permission subject to the conditions set out in the agenda and on the late material, and also subject to the legal agreement as set out in the legal agreement section of the report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Barry, for that very comprehensive summary. Before we move on to public speakers, we have councillors Kirsch and Stewart who wish to speak under procedural rule 27. So I don't mind which order you're going. I've got down councillor Kirsch going first. Is that what you wish to do? You can just nod. I can see, yeah, that's good. So over to you, councillor Kirsch. You can now address the committee with your comments. There is no set prescribed time limit for this, but bearing in mind objectors and applicants get a maximum of 5 minutes each, I would ask you to keep your comments, if at all possible, to within 5 minutes. Over to you, Andreas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, committee members, for allowing me to address the committee tonight. And I designed my speech to be slightly under 5 minutes, so I hope I will adhere to that. So this application is flawed on so many levels that it seems hard to choose where to start. The sheer amount of objections from residents should demonstrate at least well enough that there are many issues with this application. But these objections are not just a rejection of the scheme that people just don't like. These objections reflect genuine concerns from residents, valid concerns, concerns I share. The lack of affordable housing in this application is more than eye-catching. Kingston's core strategy policy DM15 affordable housing requires all new build schemes to have 50% affordable housing. The viability assessment the developers have commissioned states, I'm quoting from page 3, it is clear that regardless of whether the scheme is modeled at 17.5% or 20% developer profit, the subject development is not capable of providing a contribution towards affordable housing, end quote. I find this more than puzzling, to say at least. A scheme of 43 units unable to contribute to affordable housing, whereas numerous schemes are able to meet the requirement. However, this was the original assessment, and it seems that after reading my objection letter, the developers have thought to fix this and now propose 5 one-bedroom flats out of 43 units to be shared ownership and classified as affordable. I am glad that it appears that my objections have at least rattled the cage enough for the developers to finally consider including some sort of affordable housing. But unfortunately, this is nowhere near the 50%. It only constitutes 11%. And even more important, it does not provide any affordable family homes, whereas affordable family homes have been identified by RBK and independent studies as needed in the area. This is not good enough for our residents and not acceptable overall. I contest the viability assessment that affordable housing is not affordable for the developer when they envisage a 70.5 to 20% return of profit from the development. To be honest, words are failing me. If this application were to be granted with such a deviation from RBK's policy and the Mayor of London's policy, this would constitute a precedent for other developers to ignore affordable housing in the future and would literally open Pandora's box. We know that we need more affordable family homes in our borough and that many of our young families are looking for affordable homes. But this application does not provide affordable family homes and would be detrimental to the needs of our residents. If an application that takes the liberty not just to be at the upper end of the density guidelines for suburban areas, which is 40 to 80 units respectively, but to exceed it with a proposed density of 87.7 units, then claims to be unviable if affordable housing is included, I would argue that this application has more than serious flaws. It is hard to believe that when residents are concerned about over-densification, the answer seems to be, for this application, it seems to be fine to deliberately go above the density guidelines. Adding to this, it seems that point 54 and 55 in the agenda pack are an attempt to justify this over-densification by arguing that the area shows characteristics of an urban area. This, to be honest, is an affront to the people living in Chessington. Chessington is not an urban area, and it should not be treated as such. Just for further reference, RBK's Residential Design Guide and the Borough Character Study note that the part of Chessington affected by this application has a density range of 21 to 45 units per hectare. This application seeks one of 87.7. And in the 21 to 45 units per hectare, it's included the existing examples like St. Catherine's Close, Sienna Close, Fengate Close, and Strawberry Hill, all used by the developers to justify their application. Again, words are failing me. This is a deeply flawed application, and I have highlighted many other issues in my written statement, which forms part of tonight's agenda pack. Thank you for allowing me to represent the genuine and valid concerns of the residents of Chessington South and to express my own views on this application. Its flaws clearly outweigh the supposed benefits. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And I'm now going to turn to Councillor Christine Stewart. I can see Christine on my screen. So I'd say the same to you. I think Andreas went a little bit over the 5 minutes. There isn't any prescribed time limit for this, but I would ask you to try and keep, if you can, to 5 minutes. Thank you very much. And over to you, Christine. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and under no pressure to go very fast. I will see what I can do. I've been concerned about this development since its first inception. You will have seen from the photographs in the northernmost part of the development, it actually touches the boundary of the neighbouring property. Assuming hoardings would be erected to protect neighbouring properties during development, the height and proximity of the hoarding at all points would impact gravely upon the adjacent properties, both at number 9, 27 Bolton Close and Bolton Road. We have two different reports, one of the right to light, and I understand that nicety about a civil case, and the developer's own findings. However, there seem to be some serious misperceptions and assumptions that have been made about the effect of the new development on the light within number 9, such as a door is considered by the developer to be a glass door, when in fact only the upper part of the door is glass. I understand that COVID-19 has prevented a site visit between the developer and the owner of number 9, but I would have hoped for at least a Zoom tour of the area of dispute so that misperceptions could have been sorted out. However, with a wry smile on my face, I note numerous occasions within the report that the BRE exhort people to be good neighbours. From my perspective, a neighbour who will be starting from a level piece of ground has the perfect opportunity to build good neighbourliness into their design. But my reading of some contentious parts of the report appear to indicate that the developer expects the existing neighbour to make adaptations to their own property to mitigate against the negative impact of this development. I would be interested to hear of any benefit to existing neighbours which the developer can foresee. The onus appears to be on the residents at number 9 to improve their own source of light, which has been perfectly adequate for the past 50 years, rather than on the developer to reduce the impact of the loss of light on the neighbouring property. Andreas has already referred to the properties at Strawberry Hill, Fengate, Catherine, Sienna, but Harrow Hill does not appear to be mentioned. But one thing all these developments have in common is that in looking down the A243, None of these developments are actually physically so standing out that they hit you in the face. They are all set back from the road. They are not built along the pavement. This development is an exception. It is set right alongside the pavement, and its design, even according to the developer, is in no way in keeping with the local area. The height has throughout the modifications been out of keeping with the neighbouring houses, which was clearly shown in one of those pictures. Creating positive relationships with near neighbours should be paramount. Council officers have pointed to the saturation of parking within the area. Democratic Services have shared with the committee some photographs I took on the 31st of May. Please accept my apologies that the sun was rising at 5 a.m. and so the photography was not brilliant. But it was clear that there is little spare capacity on neighbouring roads. The current provision of just 34 parking spaces, noting the use for the motorbikes, is woefully inadequate. This is a PTEL 2 development, similar to a PTEL 2 development, which you considered at your first virtual meeting. By RBK's own standards, parking for 44 vehicles should be allocated, but by the Mayor of London standards, parking should be allowed for 50. If you were to use calculations based on the current parking attributed to those 8 properties, which was at least 13 last Sunday morning, albeit at 5 a.m, but I would hope that that would represent everybody that was in the house, at least 65 spaces would be needed. No, I'm not asking for 65 spaces, but I'm pointing out the anomaly. There's one further anomaly in that the developer has allocated 4 disabled parking bays for 5 properties designed for the disabled. It would be unlikely that a disabled person would consider buying such a property without a designated parking bay. This leads me to one of my final points. It's only one of my final, I fear, but potentially it's a significant point. It is that of accessibility. I note with interest how much work has been done to actually help the developer reach levels of acceptable accessibility. And I noticed the very recent development of incorporating 2 lifts, one on each side of the development. I welcome this improvement. However, I would like to point out that in case of fire or in case of electrical failure, it is highly unlikely that those lifts should be accessed. And so another point, a fail-safe, is needed. And that fail-safe would be the main entrance. My understanding from building regulations is that a gradient of 1 to 1.12 is recommended. But if my understanding is correct, and I am only too happy to be corrected, I have been told that the gradient of the driveway into the development is approximately 1 to 5. If there were to be a power failure, and this would have to be used, that is incredibly steep. It is also a point that for a person without a parking space who has become incapacitated, but was finding themselves having to access the site by walking, if the lifts were not available due to electrical failure, they would have to use this extremely steep slope. I'd like to thank CASO for their excellent work in helping this developer meet his obligation. And in concluding, may I remind the committee that the shared space is a source of great stress for any member of the disabled community, but in particular for those with visual impairment. Shared space is fundamental to the small amount of land within this development, and consequently a potential nightmare for any resident who found themselves with sight loss as they grew older. This should be a development for people of all physical abilities, of all ages. The small quadrangle within this development may be aesthetically pleasing, but it could pose its own challenges for health and safety. I trust that the driveway will never be viewed as a suitable skateboard challenge. Respectfully, I hope you will consider the facts I have presented this evening. Thank you for allowing me to represent the residents of Chessington South Ward. The residents are reasonable, responsible citizens, but feel that this development represents inappropriate over-densification. Please listen to them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, councillor. We now turn to registered objectors and then to the registered speaker on behalf of the applicant. I understand David Thompson has been nominated to speak on behalf of the objectors. We know that there's been a large number of objections to this application, and it's fallen upon David to represent them here this evening. After David has spoken, Simon Wallace will be speaking in support of the application. So welcome to the meeting, David. And you can now address the committee with your comments. I'm sure you're already aware that you have 5 minutes to speak, and we will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining and when your time is up. And the timer won't start, but it will start as soon as you start speaking, but not before. Thank you very much, David. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, you are invited by the borough planners to approve this application. You have discretion not to do so. You have a judgment to make. Your planners are not infallible, as evidenced by the lack of foresight with regard to the neighbouring Little development, now requiring the demolition of 2 3-bedroom semi-detached homes to allow for a bigger car park. Residents are not opposed to development. We object to this development due to its bulk and mass impact. To approve it, you would need it to apply a perversely excessive tilted balance. Just as other developments are being cited as justification for this application, so this development would become the new threshold for south of the borough developments. Such dramatic extreme densification has no place in this suburban part of the borough and has provoked overwhelming local resident opposition. Tonight, you need to look beyond the at times almost tokenistic compliance statements in the report and balance the need to meet an exceptionally challenging new build target with the local context and crucially the context of this plot of land. I invite you to take a long, hard look at the artist's impression on page 6 of the summary report. By any reasonable interpretation, this cannot be considered to be a development in tune with its surroundings. The level of intensification is extreme. It certainly cannot be described as gentle densification as defined by the Secretary of State that the mayor, he's invited the mayor to adopt. The definition of gentle is moderate, not strong or extreme as evidenced by the proposal. It would significantly adversely affect the character and appearance of the area. The height of the apartment blocks is massively overbearing and out of context with neighbouring properties. They would dwarf the neighbourhood. Your planners have failed in their responsibility to balance the proposed development with the context of place. The report states that densification guidelines should not be applied mechanistically, but neither should they be disregarded without robust justification. Just because 43 units could be built doesn't mean that they should be. Your officers appear to have been seduced by the proposal, providing over 5% of the annual build target. That alone cannot be justification to approve the proposal. There is no easy formulaic way for you to call this. You have to balance the need to increase housing stock with the context of place. The scale of the development has an almost desperate feel about it, a windfall site that the developer and your planning officers have sought to exploit. In doing so, they have lost sight of what is reasonable and just. The height of the frontal units and the courtyard housing is excessive and alien when considered with the context of place, and in our view, breaches the threshold of acceptability. The Design Southeast report states the design of the northern block seems incongruous and arbitrary, with no reference to the massing, bulk and architectural language of the southern block or of the surrounding area and suburban context. Paragraph 113 of the report suggests the design will create a more gentle, sympathetic, considerate and responsive treatment along Leatherhead Road. This is subjective. The London plan expects proposals to relate well to their surroundings. The overwhelming view of local residents, ward councillors and our MP is that this proposal is not gentle or sympathetic, nor considerate or responsive. As such, the proposal does not relate well to the surroundings. In paragraph 64, you advise that, and I quote, providing the development respects local character and context, it is considered that the proposal would optimise housing delivery. It is our assertion that by any reasonable consideration, the development fails on both counts. The recent change to air source heat pumps raises a concern of noise. The noise survey appears to be conducted from the front of number 19, a location that cannot be considered representative given the houses would have their units positioned in their rear gardens. These units are difficult to sound attenuate in that they rely on holes and grills in the encasements to allow the free movement of air. We are concerned whether such enough evaluations have taken place to ensure that the noise from these units will not have a detrimental effect on neighbouring residents. Please listen to the chorus of opposition to this scheme. Keep looking at that artist's impression if you haven't already visited the site and see for yourself. Question the objectivity of this report. The Mayor's housing SPG is clear. Appropriate density is very properly a local matter. That judgment call is now yours. The borough's locally elected representatives. In our submission, the weight of evidence is that the adverse impacts significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. The development should therefore not be permitted. Rejecting it is a legally compliant option for you to take, and I urge you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. We now turn, please stay in the meeting because members of the committee may have questions for you after the applicant or applicant's representative has spoken. So please stay with us for the moment. Welcome to the meeting, Simon. Likewise, you'll know that you've got 5 minutes to speak, and we'll let you know when there's 1 minute remaining and when your time is up. And the time will start when you start speaking. So it's over to you, Simon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This proposal before you tonight does represent change, going from 8 semi-detached houses to apartment blocks fronting Leatherhead Road and houses with gardens surrounding a central courtyard to the rear. Why can this change be considered to be appropriate here? The site is on a main road which has a more urban character. It's near to local services, shops and 2 railway stations, all within reasonable walking distance and with a good number of bus routes running past the site, making this a sustainable location that can and should accommodate housing growth. The NPPF requires us to make efficient use of land in meeting the need for homes and to consider whether it is desirable to maintain an area's prevailing character or promote change and regeneration when there is good design. The design review panel strongly supported and commended the concept of houses around a courtyard behind flatted blocks as a way of delivering more homes in a suburban context. Since that review, we have spent a lot of time working with officers through the pre-application and application process, addressing issues and amending the design of the scheme to deal with concerns. And we thank them for their time and efforts. While this scheme is change, it is contextual, given that this part of Leatherhead Road already has examples of backland developments and 3 to 4 storey buildings along this stretch of the road. The proposals do represent the gentle densification that is to be encouraged in low and mid-density locations to achieve a change of density in the most appropriate way and deliver more housing. The scheme will bring forward 43 new homes and will be a significant contribution to the pressing housing need that Kingston faces when a 5-year supply cannot be demonstrated and housing targets are to be increased. These new homes will be in a range of sizes, but with a strong emphasis on family homes with back gardens. There will be 5 fully accessible wheelchair units. Although the conclusion of the independent scrutiny of the financial viability assessment was that at present the scheme could not sustain affordable housing, 5 affordable housing units are to be provided on site, and there will be an early and late stage review to determine whether more can be accommodated in the future. All of this helps to create inclusive and mixed communities. All of the dwellings will have good living conditions for future occupiers, meeting and exceeding expected standards. and there will be a central shared amenity area incorporating doorstep play. All dwellings will have good levels of light, outlook and privacy. The level of car parking proposed with the scheme fully complies with the London plan for a site with a PSAL2 rating. All planning policy is pushing for lower levels of parking in order to reduce reliance on car use, relieve congestion and improve air quality. All the family units will be allocated a parking space. The smaller units will share the remaining. Visitor spaces can be provided, and there will be the provision of an electric car club on site, available for use by residents and local people, together with cycle stores in order to encourage alternative to private car use. The energy strategy has removed all gas usage, with air source heat pumps providing heating and hot water for all units. Provision has been made to be able to connect to a district energy network in the future. The drainage strategy to reduce any impact on flooding off-site has been confirmed as being very good by the council's flood.
1 minute, Mr. Wallace.
The scale of the scheme has been reduced, particularly on the boundaries with number 927, where it is now 2 stories in height. This allows the level of light reaching these properties to be in line with the BRE guidelines and reduces the impression of overbearing. The design approach has been careful to ensure that all surrounding neighbours' levels of privacy, outlook and light are maintained. This change in scale also helps the scheme to transition from the adjoining built form to a more focal entrance point. We have worked closely with design officers on the architecture, and the commission report describes it as being of very high quality. And whilst it will be more noticeable, it will be a building that makes a positive contribution. If there are considered to be some limited adverse impacts, we consider that they are demonstrably outweighed by the social, economic and environmental benefits of this housing scheme.
Thank you.
You can support the proposal.
Thank you very much, and I think that is your time up. Thank you very much, Simon. Stay on the call in the meeting, please. I'm now going to turn to councillors to ask first if they've got questions for the objector. If you do, then can you please write your name in the chat function now? And I'll pause just a moment to see if anybody's got questions of the objectors. There's nothing coming up. I'll wait just a moment more. No, in that case, thank you very much, David. There's no questions from members to you. I now turn to members and ask if you've got any questions for Simon, who spoke on behalf of the applicant. If you do, could you please write your name in the chat function now? And again, I'll pause just a moment. There's no names appearing. Yes, so we've got 2 names. Oh, a whole load of names. I've got Tricia, and then Lorraine, and then Kim, and then Roy, in that order. So we've got 4. This is questions to Simon. So Simon, we'll start the time. We've got 5 minutes for questions, and we'll start the time as soon as the first question starts to be asked. I'm just checking with Democratic Services. That's fine. I got those, yeah. I'm just making a note. Tricia, Lorraine, Kim and Roy. So I'm going to turn first of all to Tricia. Councillor Bamford, if you can go ahead with your question, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully I should be unmuted now. Thank you, everyone, for all of your contributions so far. They have been interesting. There has been one clear message. And what I want to ask is that given the opportunity that the developers had to put revisions to this scheme, particularly after they heard the very vociferous objections at the south of the Borough neighbourhood, why did they make such limited revisions to a plan that was clearly so unpopular with the local area? They tinkered at the margins as far as I could see. Could you answer that, please? Thank
you, Tricia. it's back to you, Simon. This is asking you why you tinkered with the revisions rather than made something more substantial, I guess. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. So the changes that were made following the Neighbourhood Committee were to reduce the scale of the development on the boundaries. The platted blocks at the front were reduced by 1 full storey on those boundaries, and they were to deal both with a design issue to help the scheme transition and integrate between the existing dwellings along Leatherhead Road, and also to deal with amenity concerns that had been raised by both neighbours, and that reduction in scale has helped on issues particularly with light and overbearing. The overall height of the scheme was also, it was reduced because the change in the roof form, and that was flattened out more to remove the points of the Dutch gables. But in discussions that we have been having, the scale along Leatherhead Road, although it is different, was felt to be at an acceptable level, but we did reduce it on the boundaries to allow that transition of scale to happen from 2-storey semis on our boundaries, and then to build up the height as we reached our central area.
Thank you, Simon. I think you've answered the question in the limited time that you've got as best. Well, I'm not passing comment on your answer, but as fully as you can. We'll try and get as many questions in as we can, so I'll go straight to Lorraine. Over to you, Lorraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I just wondered what the thought process was behind the shared community space in the middle of the courtyard, well, in the courtyard itself, with regards to using for under 5-year-olds as a play area along with the car vehicular movements. Thank you.
Simon.
Shall I answer that? Yeah, thank you, Chair. There always has been a fundamental aspiration of the scheme to provide that communal space for all of the development to use, but that communal space at the rear with the houses behind. We've looked very carefully in the Highways Department, we've looked very carefully in TfL about how that space is shared and can be safe, and it does meet all those requirements.
Interrupt you there. I do apologise. Can we stop the timer, please, for questions? I'm going to just turn to Sam. We may have lost a councillor on the connection, and rather than preclude them from the meeting, we'll give them a chance to rejoin. I'm going to defer to you, Sam, just for advice on this. Thank you, Sam.
Yes, yeah, just to confirm, we're just going to try and get hold of Councillor Bailey at the moment. She just dropped out of the connection, so we're just going to
was with us
contact her
until about a minute ago, so we won't preclude her from taking part in the rest of the meeting, but I will just stop the meeting for a moment. We'll stop the timer for questions, and we'll see if we can get Councillor Bailey back on. Thank you.
Chair, could I please request a comfort break for 2 minutes?
Yes, why not? There will be a whilst we're waiting. That seems like a good idea, Roy. Why not?
Thank you.
We will wait for you to get back. You don't need to disconnect, but we'll wait till you're back in position, and anybody else that wishes to use the time for that. Thank you.
I don't think Kim is muted.
Sorry, no, I'll mute now.
Thanks, Kim.
Chair, we are now live.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam, and welcome back to the meeting, everybody watching on the Council's YouTube channel. Unfortunately, Councillor Kim Bailey temporarily lost her connection. She's back with the meeting now, so thank you very much, Kim, and we can confirm that all the other councillors on the committee are still with us. The point that Kim lost her connection, Tricia Bamford, Councillor Bamford had asked the applicant a question about the limited number or the limited amount of revisions that were made since the South of the Borough consultation meeting back in January. And Simon, speaking on behalf of the applicant, had given his answer, but Kim missed some of that. So we're going to add 1 minute to the question time to enable Simon just to recap on his answers to Tricia's limited revision question, and then we'll go on to other questions. So I think we've got the clock, instead of 2 minutes, at 3 minutes left. Is that right, Sam?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you very much. So it's back to you. So I'm sorry for the disruption, Simon, but you've just had a question from Councillor Bamford. About the limited revisions? I know you answered, but if you can just summarise your answer again, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. I'll try and do it very quickly. We did make changes, particularly on the boundaries. So a full story was removed from the flatted blocks on the boundaries to make the scheme link better in transition with our neighbours. It was also to do with amenity impacts and sunlight and daylight and outlook and so on. The height of the scheme in the middle, in discussion with design officers, we had always felt that was an appropriate height, but the very top of it was lowered and the gables were flattened just to bring that overall height down.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon. Over to you, Lorraine. Councillor Dunstan, with your question, please.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is wondering what the thought process it was behind using a shared space for under 5-year-olds and motor vehicles in the courtyard. Thank you.
Will I answer that now?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, lots of messages coming through. Thank you, Simon. I do apologise. Yeah, over to you, Simon. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think I was saying the concept very much in that central courtyard was to create a community amenity area in the middle of that courtyard, which can be used as outdoor space and also for doorstep play. It does have the shared pedestrian and vehicle space around that. That has been through the Healthy Streets check and also Department for Transport's traffic calming notes. It self limits speeds because of the short distances. So car movements will only ever be at very low speeds. The amenity area also has a lot of different changes in textures and boulders and wood and trees and so on that provides protection to that central space.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Councillor Bailey, Kim, I think you've got a question. If you can unmute, Kim, and go ahead with your question.
So yeah, in the papers, there's reference to this getting a Lifetime House Award. I'm just wondering if you could briefly tell me what that is. It looks as though it's a nice multi-generational development, but I'd perhaps just like some enhancement on that.
Okay, the Lifetime House Award. Thank you, Simon. Thank
1 minute for questions, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, so all the dwellings, 5 of them, as I said, are fully accessible at the moment, wheelchair accessible. All the other dwellings are adaptable, and so they serve a lifetime purpose, so that if those homes need to be adapted in the future to accommodate lesser mobility, then that is achievable with this scheme. So it is a lifetime development. We used to call it lifetime homes. That's sort of maybe no longer in the planning system, but the thinking behind how we've designed all the homes is certainly that they will be there suitable for a lifetime.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, we'll see if we can get your question in. Roy, over to you.
It is a very quick question. I'm not familiar with this particular road or this area, if I'm honest. In your presentation, you mentioned there are other 3 to 4 story buildings. My question is, are those residential built properties?
Yes, they are. Further along Leatherhead Road, little nearby is a commercial building that is a bit taller, but further along there are residential blocks which are 3 and 3/4, so sometimes accommodation in the roof. So there are examples of that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for that good, succinct answer. And that takes us to the 5 minutes for questions. I do apologise that we had a break halfway through. So thank you, David and Simon. That concludes our public participation. You may now leave the meeting and can follow the rest of the proceedings on the YouTube stream. Thank you very much. I'm now going to turn back to Barry Lomax for a sweep up and comments and possible responses to both the councillors who made their representations and to the objector and the applicant. Over to you, Barry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I only have a couple of points to come back on. First, some comments were made with regards to the affordable housing offer and where that offer stands in relation to planning policy. Now, I think it's important to note that the financial viability assessment, which has been submitted by the applicant, has gone through a rigorous process reviewed by both officers and by independent external consultants. And this is one of the reasons for the delay, that we have been pushing to see what we can squeeze out of the development in terms of affordable homes. The policy position is you should provide 50% of the units as affordable unless you can demonstrate that to do so would be unviable. And then the policy would require you to provide the maximum reasonable amount. Independent consultants confirm that the maximum reasonable amount in terms of this development is 0. So the 5 units which we've managed to negotiate out of the developer is over and above what they would be required to be, what would be required to be delivered. So that is something which we consider to be a significant benefit. It's also worth noting that 2 of the 5 units are accessible units, and we have a requirement in the legal agreement that we would look at the marketing to make sure that they are really marketed at those people with mobility needs in an affordable housing need. So there would be a matching up of need and provision. There was some issue raised about the daylight and sunlight assessment carried out next door. I think we've lost Councillor Aurora.
I'm sorry, I do apologise, Barry. We seem to be having some technical difficulties this evening. I'm going back to Sam. I think we've lost.
He's back in.
And he's back in.
He's back, Chair.
Hello, Roy. You're back in. You left us for a short time, but we can just carry on. I think you were up to speed with all that Barry has said before we stopped. So back to you, Barry. Thank you.
Some questions raised about the daylight and sunlight assessment. As I said as we said in the presentation, the issues of rights to light is a civil matter, and that is discrete and separate to a daylight and sunlight assessment, which one would carry out in assessing an application. There was concern about some misinterpretation about a glass door between the utility room and the kitchen. I can confirm that the agent's light consultants were aware of the makeup of that door, and their assessment did take it into account. So we are content that the assessment has been carried out in accordance with policy, but we acknowledge that there will be an impact on the south-facing kitchen window of the neighbouring property. With regards to the lifts, there are 3 lifts which would provide access to the podium, and it is not uncommon for a development to rely on lift infrastructure for people to access flats, and those flats on higher levels could be accessible flats or flats for people with mobility needs. So it's not uncommon to have lifted or lift provision infrastructure to provide for the needs of those with mobility issues. And then turning to the comments of Design South East, it's important to note that the comments of Design South East were based on an earlier scheme. So Design South East provided high-level comments saying they support the suburban densification, they support the idea of a central amenity square, and they support they think the scheme has the possibility of being an exemplar. They raised concerns about the northern block. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I will just show you the scheme on which they provided their comments. The scheme you see on screen at the moment is the scheme which was which has concerns by Design South East. Their concerns were that the northern, which is what these properties are here, the northern apartment blocks are out of character with what surrounds it. It may live a relationship to the surrounding properties, and officers agree. They were flat-roofed properties with a recessed top level, which is why we've been working with the developer to get in or get those gable features into the development to address those concerns. They also raised concerns about the car dominance, which was in relation to this large area of car parking at the back. That has now been amended to go under the apartment facility so as to reduce the car dominance. So just to clarify, those reservations about certain parts of the scheme raised by Design South East were in relation to a previous scheme, and our urban design colleagues have been working on this scheme so as to address the concerns of the Design South East group. I think that's everything I have to come back on, Mr. Chairman, but of course, happy as always to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry. And that does indeed take us on to questions from the committee to officers. What I would request of members is that you do keep this bit. We will be going on after this to discussion and debate, but this bit is for questions. So this is for points of clarification rather than questions that lead into maybe a long comment. You will have your chance for your comments. So any questions? Councillor Bamford had already indicated that she had a question, I believe. If others, can you please type your name in the chat function? Thank you. And I can see some names have come up there. I'll start with Patricia, and then after Patricia's spoken, I'll read out a list of who else has got. So straight over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask the officers if the amended scheme went back to the design review panel for comment.
Thank you, Patricia. Officers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, the scheme didn't go back to the Design South East panel, and the reason being is, of course, it is choice of the applicant. The local authority doesn't put schemes to DSE, the applicant does. However, the urban design colleagues or urban design officers of the council have been present throughout the process. They were there for the Design South East review in the first instance. They have been discussing with colleagues in Design South East, and they are confident that this scheme addresses the concerns of Design South East. There is a significant reduction in car parking prominence in the centre, and the design of that front elevation has been amended so as to meet or to be more in character with what surrounds it. So in terms of Design South East, no, you're quite right, Councillor Bamford, it didn't go back, but the urban design officers of council consider it to be a good design. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, may I? Yeah, yes, I do have a slight follow-up question, because the design review panel, they are an independent body of planning experts, architects, whereas it might be said that our urban design department at the council are not necessarily that independent, given that they are looking at the interests of the local authority in trying to achieve the targets set by government. One could interpret that as, So I'm not sure that that is independent enough, frankly.
Is that
That's a question. That's a question wrapped up in a comment. I beg your pardon. But
I'm not sure.
highlights the question.
Barry, if you've got any comments to come back on that.
Yeah.
We note that it didn't go back to the design review panel and that they are independent. Have you got anything else to add on that, Barry?
Councillor Bamford is, of course, correct in terms of Design South East's position as an independent body. However, I would like to assure colleagues, having worked with our urban design colleagues now for numerous years, they are what we would consider to be an independent and a robust challenge to planning officers. They certainly challenge and ensure that designs which come in front of this committee have been given robust challenge. And indeed, in instances when they identify poor design and they object to a scheme, they then row in behind the planning officers at appeal, like the Surrey House Public Inquiry, and make a good case and are successful. So I shouldn't want anybody to think that they are anything other than a very critical eye when it comes to design. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Barry. I've got Councillor Mull. Rebecca, could you like to put your question?
Hi, it's to do with highways. So I understand that the traffic modelling has suggested in peak it would only be about 7 extra trips, I think, from memory. I don't have the paragraph in front of me. But we know, or any of us that have driven along that route know the issues that can happen along that road, including with Lidl, and Lidl indeed have had to or are going to be building a new car park. So could you just clarify why this is seen as not adding, or why it's seen okay from a highways issue, given, I guess, residents' knowledge of the road?
Thank you, Rebecca. Barry, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So yes, and we acknowledge and appreciate the comments of residents with regards to the highway matters, and as a result of those comments, we have been working closely with our highway colleagues and TfL on this application. And both TfL, because it is a TfL road, it's a red route, and our highway colleagues are content that the transport assessment in terms of the AM, PM additional traffic movements are correct, and are also content that those extra movements can be accommodated on the network. So our highway officers and TfL have to address paragraph 109 of the framework, whether the residual cumulative impacts of the development would be severe in highway terms, or whether there's an unacceptable impact on the highway network. And in addressing their concerns to both questions, the highway team and TfL raise no objection. So this is why the report is written the way it is. We have no objections in highway matters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Barry. And on my list, this is still for questions at the moment. I've got Councillor Heap and then Councillor Dunstone. So we've picked them up. Over to you, Leslie. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Reference was made to the backland developments of St Catherine's Close, Fengates Close, Sienna and Strawberry Hill. I just wondered whether Barry could confirm which of those sites, if any, were brownfield sites or which built on actual sort of garden land. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I don't know whether we've got that info. It's obviously that's historical, but I don't know if we've got that information to hand, Barry. I don't know the answer to that. Other councillors may, but I'll hand over to you, Barry, to answer that if you're able to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am sure that a couple of those sites were indeed brownfield sites. The purpose, so I think the one directly to the south was a brownfield site looking, is that St Catherine's, I think, looking at historic photos, was a brownfield site, and I think the site directly opposite was a brownfield site. However, the purpose for officers bringing these sites to the attention of councillors is to demonstrate that backland development is not unique, or there are other examples on this road. And indeed, there are many examples in the borough on sites that aren't backland development. What I would say is the National Planning Policy Framework is clear that when we're addressing backland development or building on gardens, if the local authority considers that to be objectionable, they are invited to set a policy in their local plan identifying that such development is unacceptable. Kingston doesn't have such a policy, which we'd be able to pray in aid of in terms of development on garden land such as this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Barry. Councillor Dunstan, over to you, Lorraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just for a point of clarity, really. I just wanted to check that if the committee was minded to approve, we've obviously gone back and we fought to get the additional funds for local parks, the additional from £5,000 to £20,000, which they've come back and agreed to. But I want to ask that if the committee were minded to approve the application, that the monies come to neighbourhood to be distributed, ensure that it's spent in the local community and not in the general funds. Can you just confirm that's acceptable? Thank you.
Thanks for that. Good question, Lorraine. I don't know what the technicalities are of that, so I will have to defer to officers. I fully understand the question, and I can understand as a previous long-standing chair of neighbourhood, not this one, but where you're coming from in that. Do we have an answer to that? Do we know that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think certainly this £20,000 now is to address infrastructural requirements of this development, and I think it would be quite proper, Councillor Dunstan's suggestion, that in a legal agreement there is a mechanism by which that money is spent so as to ensure that it does meet the needs of this development. Now, it is. I'm going to say something rather strange. It is a small amount and a large amount at the same time. It's not large in terms of a council budget. It's £20,000, but it is large in terms of what it could pay for in the immediacy of this site. And as such, in short, I could have just made this answer very quickly by saying yes. But in short, yes, I think that would be perfectly legal in terms of the SIL tests for it to be linked to the neighbourhood and for it to be spent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I'm pleased for that answer. And I don't think anybody is going to disagree or argue with, or I think we would all endorse that is an if should this application be approved and the £20,000 should be, the allocation of it should be decided by the neighbourhood. I would be 100% behind that. Thank you. Mark Banyan, Councillor Banyan, you've indicated you'd like to ask a question, so you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So it's regarding the affordable housing. I understand that the viability reports, you know, that there was no, well, because of the viability reports, there's no obligation to build or to provide affordable housing initially, at least. But I was just wondering, in terms of what was offered or what the discussions that took place, was it just based around shared ownership, or were there any discussions around other types of affordable housing? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That's a good question. Who came up with the shared ownership? Could we not have had some rented at discount from market or whatever?
Thank you.
Over to you, Barry. Thank you.
Thank you. So, because we can't insist on the affordable units, they are at the an ex gratia offer from the developer. It was a response to their offer of 5 shared ownership. However, we then did work with the developer to ensure that they are 5 one-beds, which would make them more affordable because they are on the smaller scale in terms of the 3-bed, the 2-bed, the 1-bed, so they are more affordable in terms of an intermediate shared ownership offer. But we also worked with the developer to ensure that at least 2 of those units were accessible units in terms of building regulations M4 Part 3. So they came with their offer, and we worked with them to make sure, in line with what was offered, it met the needs as best it could of the borough. So certainly the accessible units and them being at the 1-bedroom would meet more of a need in the borough. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Benyon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think so. Thank you, Barry. And Councillor Aurora has got a question. Over to you, Roy. Thank you.
Actually, Chair, my question was to do with affordable homes, which has just been answered, so thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Roy. There's no other names appearing on the chat function to ask questions, which I'll just pause a moment. No, there's no more questions. So thank you very much for that. And we now turn to debate and decision by the committee in that order, obviously. So debate. I'll call on those members. As before, if you wish to speak, please type your name in the chat function. I'll wait a few moments for names to suddenly appear, because I don't have any names at the moment, but I'm pretty sure that there's going to be people who want to speak on this. So we're to the debate. And now I'm getting them mixed up, but I've got, so I had previously, we were told that Councillor Bamford wanted to speak, so we've got you, Tricia, first. I've got Tricia at the moment, and then I've got to do my cut off right here, and then Simon, and then Lorraine, and I'm going to turn to, you can carry on if you want to speak on the debate. Just type your name in the chat function, and we'll pick that up as we go along. And we're going to start off with Tricia. So over to you, Tricia. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure it's right that I should be first in a way, but in a way, I guess it is, as one of the ward councillors. I've been ward councillor here for 22 years, so I'm very familiar with this area. My first point is, it relates to page A3 of the report, looking at the key issues. And it says about the key issues in this case are, 1, the delivery of market and affordable dwellings. Well, we've already heard that there's a proposal for only 11%. 2, the scale and density of the development. Well, that exceeds the standard guidance. If you look at the key policy dashboard below, the standard and guidance is 40 to 80 units. And the proposal is for 87.7 rooms per hectare. So that's another anomaly. The third point is the impact of the development on the character and appearance of the area. And that would be changed beyond reason with a continuous high block on that highway frontage, where currently there are semi-detached houses. And most people see this as some kind of aberration, frankly. And that's what we heard, although I didn't participate in the discussion at Neighbourhood, that's what we heard at Neighbourhood loud and clear. And there was a great opportunity for changes to be made when the revisions were done, but it's clear that, and we've heard again this evening from the applicant, that they ignored all of that. There's not been much said about the impact on the highway, but I can tell you now that ward councillors met with Transport for London after the road was resurfaced last year, because we were concerned that a number of stretches of cycle lanes had been removed. And I think Lorraine was there as well as chair of the neighbourhood. And there are no proposals at the moment to reinstate those cycle lanes. And yet everyone's being encouraged to cycle. And yet you've got a road where there's a proposal to put a massive development on and not actually have any cycle lanes right outside that property, or any of those properties, frankly. The impact on the next point is the impact of the development on residential amenity of neighbouring properties. Well, I did visit number 9 before lockdown, you won't be surprised to hear. And whilst we recognised the height at the end of the blocks was adjusted, there's still a difference in height when you look at the comparison with the existing buildings proposed of a 5.13 increase in height from the original building, which I see as excessive when that's actually facing Victorian cottages on the other side of the road. It seems completely out of place and out of character. And also the impact of the development on the biodiversity value of the site. That's something that I'm also concerned about. The drone footage highlighted a lot of that we were privy to. It might be that the arboriculturalist suggests that the quality of the trees isn't that great, but that vast green habitat that is currently in the middle of that site is home to all sorts of things. And the report mentions crested newts, it doesn't mention the hedgehogs. No mention of them at all, and I bet you anything there's hedgehogs along there. And then air quality, that's the last of the bullet points. It's better than it's been for years, frankly, during lockdown with a reduced number of cars. But only yesterday, because I live on the A243 a lot further up on the Hook Road, we could see that when there was congestion, it went up beyond my house, back up to the North Star. And so that would have been chucking out fumes along that stretch of Leatherhead Road as well, because there was a collision and congestion further down. So it won't take long for that to be restored. I do have a lot more I could say, but can I stop now and listen to some other people? Because they may well have a view, but that's a snapshot of my view of this.
We'll be conducting this. Thank you very much, Tricia. I will conduct this meeting as far as I can, as close to a meeting in the room. So it's not unusual for people to want to have a say and then come back on the debate at a later stage. That will be absolutely fine. Just type your name in the chat function.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, Tricia, for that. I've got Simon and then Lorraine at the moment. Nobody else has indicated at this moment, but over to you, Councillor Edwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to pick up on the issues that have been raised, or the major issues that have been raised, I won't give my views on all of them. Affordable housing is a discrete issue, and it is a disappointment, to say the least, that this site could not support any, and I suppose we should be grateful to an extent that there's the offer that there is. Now, that's been the subject of an independent assessment, and my guess is that one of the principal reasons is the underground car park, which will be a very expensive bit of building. Now, we, in a sense, we don't have a choice, I don't think, because the policy is crystal clear that if the development is shown independently not to be able to support the affordable housing, then that's not a reason to refuse the application. So far as density is concerned, which I suppose goes hand in hand with local character, and we've been told time and again we shouldn't apply the matrix mechanistically, and we've been told recently, of course, that we should look to optimize all sites. What I think is critical here is the fact that this is an arterial road. If this was a road off the A243, then I think the considerations would be entirely different, and I wouldn't want anybody to think that this could set any form of precedent for developments in roads which lead off the A243 and are not the arterial road. In terms of the local character, apart from density, Councillor Aurora asked whether there were any 3 or 4 story residential dwellings nearby, and the Harrow Close is not far from that, which has both, I think. In terms of parking and highways, the A243 is a very, very busy road, and I think we have to accept our highways and TfL expert views that this will only make a very marginal difference to the business of that road. And as for parking, well, we all know that the pressure is on to reduce parking at developments and not to provide a car for every property. And indeed, if we tried that, the mayor might not like it very much. It really is homes before cars in this respect. I actually quite like the design. It's a very subjective thing. I quite like the look of the sort of, the applicant put it, the Dutch warehouse look. I think that's quite novel and innovative. And something I think they should be given credit for is the change from what I was very grateful to Barry to show us what it looked like beforehand. It really didn't look very good at all. And I think the change they made in the design after the design review panel had a look at it was really good. In terms of amenity and privacy, well, yes. So people at number 9 and number 27 are going to lose some of their amenity and some of their privacy, and that's a concern. And I note the mitigation measures which have been fed in, and they're never going to take away from the fact that instead of back gardens, there is a housing development right next to their back garden, and that is going to make a difference. And that's something that has to be weighed in the balance. But to be set against that is the fact that we're getting a substantial increase in the number of homes, and that's something which is of, I think, critical importance here. So, I haven't finally decided which way to go, but at the moment I'm inclined to support this for all of those reasons. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Simon. And I've got Lorraine and then Kim and then David. I've picked those up. So I'm going to go straight to Councillor Dunstan. Over to you, Lorraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what Tricia's put through, so I won't harbour on a lot of what she said, but I will sort of go into some other reasons that well, on my list, the things that I've got, I wanted to highlight. One of the things is the character of the area. It is mainly semi-detached houses on that stretch of the road. Yes, there are quite a way down, further higher builds, but actually surrounding it is mainly 2-storey, semi-detached, mock Tudor properties with some cottages on the other side of the road. The other side of the road does slope down quite a bit. So when we're looking at some of the properties that may be 3 stories, they don't actually look like 3 stories when you're going past. This development stands out like a sore thumb as you come off the roundabout at Bridge Road, as all these lovely people are going to Chessington Model Adventures with additional traffic on the roads. So I have a problem with the heights and the blocking of the development. I'm completely, well, I'm really very, very concerned about the shared space for vehicles and pedestrians inside that courtyard. Whilst vehicles might be travelling quite slowly, if, for instance, a vehicle is having to do a manoeuvre, they're not going to see an under 5-year-old behind them. And that does worry me. And the report also says that the communal play area will be accessible for the general public. But then it says a gate might need to be fitted. So I'm not quite sure how the general public are going to get onto that one. I am worried about the neighbouring properties, which will be significantly affected, number 9, but also number 27, by having 5 new homes backing onto the length of their garden. There is a P-TOW rating of 2 in the area, and I appreciate the council has announced a climate emergency and we don't want to have more cars on the road. And it's true that there are 2 train stations close by and a bus route towards Kingston. However, if you want to get anywhere else, I think you'd struggle because trying to get towards the M25 is 1 bus every half an hour and Epsom's every hour. And so that, these are just a few of my concerns supporting what Councillor Bamford has said. But the density matrix as well, whilst it needs to be taken, set in context, personally, I feel the context of the locality and together with everything else is just too high. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. I've now got Kim, David, Roy, and Rebecca. So over to you, Kim. Thank you.
Hi. Yeah, I'd just like to say that I like to see the houses being built with gardens. It's something that's not often presented when people are redeveloping a plot of land. It's normally as many flats as they can get on, maybe 2-storey perhaps sometimes, but that personal space, and Chesterton is an area where young families go, and to have new houses, sort of 17 houses where there were 8, I think is an advantage. I think the access for the disability is very good there. It does look as though it could be a real multi-generational housing unit. And as to affordability, because it is, I mean, I know you're talking about the character of the road, it's a main road there. So perhaps the flats facing onto the main road will be quite affordable just from the market nature of the properties. So maybe that's not such an area. Also, there's some talk about, Lorraine mentioned the Pittle 2 area. We had a look around there today, and the stations were quite near, and there's the buses are there. Bad transport links, well, I mean, everybody in Chessington is going to be affected by that. So what is that going to be an excuse never to build in Chessington because there aren't good bus routes? I mean, that's another issue, I feel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim, for your contribution. Thank you. I've got David and then Roy and then Rebecca at the moment. I'll check if I've got anybody else, but over to you, David. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I've got a sort of feeling of deja vu here. The council considered the suburbs 2 years ago in December 17, and we had a main council meeting at that time when we discussed this, and in fact a decision was made, and it was a unanimous decision by the whole of the council. And I've just looked it up, and if you bear with me, it's only a short paragraph. I'll read what the council said. It says, a target that relies so heavily on a policy of small sites demolition and replacement at more than double the current density is one that will potentially slow housing delivery, but also destroy the cultural and community of suburban London and disproportionately affect the quality of the life of Londoners. Now, that's the policy which the council ratified as a unanimous decision. And I've got to say that I feel that there's been discussion regarding whether this would be a threshold. Well, of course it will be a threshold. It was the Mayor for London's policy to have at least as many of these small sites as there were for the large ones. And of course, it's true that the inspector at the local plan, on the London plan, reduced considerably the numbers. He didn't actually give good reasons, rather than it was undeliverable. So I've got to say, I do think this application is out of character to the estate. It's going to be a threshold for lots of other developments like that. Having said that, I've listened to the other people on the committee, and they've all expressed criticism about the development, but nobody's coming forward with saying, well, I'm going to vote against it. Because actually, the report that we've had from the officer seems to cover just about all of the queries that we seem to have. Certainly on the affordable housing is not what we want. It doesn't appear that we have an opportunity to do very much about it. Yes, a few extra houses have come forward, but they're not social housing, and that's really what we do need. So in a general, I do share a lot of the views of the committee regarding I'm not happy with this site. I'm not, in the way that it's being brought forward, but I cannot for the life of me see that there are sufficient reasons. And the main one, of course, that I would see is that it's out of character and it doesn't relate to the rest of the surroundings. And it would appear that from the report that we're getting from the officers that there's not a substantive reason there to defend that on appeal. And unless there are any other members of the committee who feel like me strongly enough in order to find a reason that we could defend at appeal, that
I would have to go along with the application.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I think we can tell that you've got a lot of experience, and what should we say? You've got a lot of knowledge. I would just query the Mayor for London's policy on small sites. I don't think technically this site qualifies as a small site, which, although I'm not disagreeing with you, that in my mind I would think of this as the small sites, as in the Mayor wanting to bring small sites in. I'm not disagreeing with you on that, but I think I would have thought technically this is not a small site. Barry might cover that when we go back to him if we need to. But thank you, David. I'm going to move to Mark. No, sorry, to Roy. Sorry, to Councillor Aurora. I do apologise. Thank you.
Chair, through you, if you may, could we ask Barry that question? Whether this, before I do my comments, whether this is constituted small site.
I mean, we could just have a clarification on the small sites programme. Obviously, even although the new London plan, we know that from when it was first drafted, the small sites allocation has been reduced considerably, but that doesn't mean there are, in the new London plan, when it gets adopted sometime this year, probably, there's a requirement to bring forward sites on, housing on small sites. But what could you just clarify that policy?
Thank you. No, I should use the right equipment. I should try again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the small sites policy in the London plan is on sites of 0.25 hectares. So this would be outside of that small site policy.
Okay, well that's okay. Thanks for that. Yeah, I don't know if that makes a lot of difference to the general thrust of the debate we're having. I don't think actually, but thank you.
Sorry, can I come back on that?
Yeah, please do, because
I actually attended the original presentation on the London plan when it was given forward. And although the numbers may be reduced, it was the policy of being able to demolish what were considered unreasonable areas that was put forward. So it may well be that the text may say that, but I can assure you that when the policy was put forward, the actual element of demolishing properties in order to put in higher density was the policy behind it, because I was there at the time when it was spoken. So I will accept, obviously, if the officers are saying that the word of small sites may not apply, but certainly the policy which the mayor sought to achieve was certainly of exactly the sort of nature that we're talking about on this this item.
Thank you, David. And all I can do is totally agree with you. I think when it went to council in 2017, I was there, and I'm sure that's in our minds. This is that. I'm just agreeing with you. Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Roy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that clarification. Quite a lot of what I wanted to say has actually been covered by David, Kim, and indeed by Simon. So I won't repeat a lot. The 2 points I will make is, one is my major concern to do with lack of adequate affordable homes. Many people have talked about this, and I do feel quite strongly that I know the officers tell us and the report tell us that there's been a viability study that's been done which proves that the developer does not need to present any affordable homes because the figures just don't stack up. Personally, when the developers say the figures don't stack up, I personally don't buy it. I think my view is that we did not ask you to come up with this scheme and build it in Kingston. This is your choice. If the figures don't stack up, that's your issue, not ours. Go back, find another scheme where the figures do stack up and give us our affordable homes. Perhaps not 50%, but certainly a lot more than what you're offering now. But that is my view. But having said that, we still have to nevertheless assess this on its merit that presented before us. And the appeal inspector would probably take the view that a independent financial viability assessor has backed their figures, and probably would not resist this scheme if it went to appeal. That's going on in the back of my head right now. And the other point that's going on is the mass and bulk and the overall street scene view of the overall scheme. The question that one has to ask is, in accordance with the tilted balance acid test that we always apply, is the harm caused by this significant and demonstrable? Well, that is, in my opinion, very subjective and can be debated at length. I'm not actually totally convinced on this occasion it's not significant and demonstrable. I think it is quite questionable, and I do believe that it is my view that an inspector would have to look at this very, very carefully and whether or not this is significant and demonstrable. So I'm not sure whether if this went to appeal, it would fail on that ground. I am torn between whether to support this or not, if I'm really honest. I'd like to hear what some of the others would say. But the 2 points that I'm concerned about, as I said, is lack of affordable homes and mass and bulk. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Roy. Thank you. I'm going to take them in the order that they've been put in, which is Rebecca, then Tricia, and then Mark. I'm going to turn to Rebecca next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Some of it is repeating as I'm thinking through, so I hope you bear with me. So the density obviously is high, but with tilted balance, plus the late material clarification of waiting to the draft London plan, I'm not personally persuaded this is a consideration that would mean you could refuse the application. The highway concerns, as ever, I feel like the way that we as well, the residents, but we as councillors, as residents, feel things versus the experts, that there definitely is a clash. It's a road that seems to be at capacity. So the issues are that any increase at peak times, it's hard to see how that can be considered acceptable. However, obviously this is a planning committee, and so the experts have ruled, and I think that potentially it's something where the policy is an issue, and potentially that's where it needs to be changed rather than specifically something we could deal with tonight. Which brings me on to affordable housing, because that definitely feels, I mean, that it's just absolutely clear that the policy is weak. If a site like this in that area,
Rebecca.
Yeah.
We seem to have a connection difficulty. Kim Bailey was with us until a moment ago. I'm going to turn to Sam just a moment. I'm really sorry to stop you when you're in mid-train. Sam, have we lost Councillor Bailey?
Yes, Chair, it does seem that way.
I'm going to pause the meeting. You'll see to the YouTube channel. I'm going to stop the meeting or pause the meeting just for a moment to allow Kim to come back. I noticed very quickly when she left the meeting, so she was with us until about a few seconds before I stopped. Sam, is that okay? Can you just confirm where we are with that, please?
Yes, Chair, I'm just talking to IT now. We're going to adjourn the meeting.
Okay, so the meeting is adjourned just for a moment. If anybody does need a comfort break, now's the time. But we will be back just Yeah. Oh dear.
Chair, Councillor Mole is to have dropped out.
Can we stop going back to the live? I don't know if we're back on the live feed or not, but we've...
Councillor Mole is here.
Back, so we're okay. Good. Excellent. You'll let me know, Sam, when we're ready to go. Thank you.
We are now live, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sam. Welcome back, everybody that's watching on the YouTube channel. We had a brief interruption there. One of our councillors lost connection just very briefly again. I can confirm that we're all back online and we can all hear that's going on. When Councillor Bailey, unfortunately, she only lost connection for a few moments. It was whilst Councillor Mole was speaking. So I'm going to ask Councillor Mole to go back as if you're being called, Rebecca, for the first time to speak on the debate. So just recap on what you've said, and it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for any repetition. So I started with talking about the density, as the report says it is high, but with tilted balance and the late material clarification of the weighting that we should give to the draft London plan, I personally would not be convinced that this would be a consideration for refusal. On the highway concerns, it seems to be another one of those areas where we as residents fail to agree or understand how the experts have arrived at the conclusion they have. It's a road that is at capacity, so it's hard for anyone to see how any increase at peak times can be considered acceptable. However, the policy is what it is, and the planning law does not allow us to go against the experts, so it might be something that we need to consider ongoing rather than a reason for refusal for this application. And similarly, and I think more pertinently, the issue with affordable housing, the policy yet again, and I think it's clearer than ever how we can, if a site like this cannot be viable to provide any affordable housing except for at the applicant's discretion. To put it mildly, it's disappointing. To put it bluntly, we need to really look at how we are going to lobby for this policy. But again, it is not a consideration that I think gives weighting for refusal for this specific application. So, like others, it does not. I agree that it does not seem to be an ideal proposal application. Yeah, I'm not convinced that they're good, and there is some good. The houses with gardens that Councillor Bailey talked about, and Councillor Edwards, along with the policy conformity, I think outweigh the negatives. Some of which do meet the technical acceptance. So at this point, I am not convinced that there is a reason for refusal, and I think I would be minded to accept. But I'm conscious that we do have some fellow councillors that I am ready to talk, that I am willing to listen to.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And we all heard you right the way through that time, so thank you very much. I had in my list next Tricia. Tricia has put a request in to speak after Mark. I've got Tricia and then Mark. Do you mind? I'll ask Mark. Do you mind? Could you just come and unmute Mark? Do you mind who goes first?
Well, I don't mind. I'm happy. Well, since Tricia said she'll wait until everyone else has spoken, shall I speak now?
If you're happy with that, that's fine. Yeah. Over to you then, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, I've listened to my colleagues' comments with interest, and yeah, I do find this kind of a difficult one to assess. I mean, it's not, the scheme definitely isn't without its merits, and I mean, I could repeat a lot of what I wanted to say has been said, but you know, Councillor Bailey mentioned the merits of the scheme, and you know, the green, the gardens, and the accessibility. I just have there are obviously problems. I think most of us would agree there are certain issues that we're not completely happy with, and the density is a big one. I think the developers, the proposed assignment, I think it was said, you know, that we should be supporting gentle densification. I mean, this is quite a substantial change in the density of the local area and the impact on the surroundings. So, I mean, that is a concern, certainly one of the main concerns. The other concern, again, like everyone's touched upon this, is affordable housing. I understand, according to the policy, the viability tests have been done. So whatever we think, the viability tests have been done, and there is no kind of obligation. So I don't think that would necessarily stand up. But there is but at the same time, I think if this had maybe come in a different format, the developers may have been able to find a way of producing the development that could, sustain affordable housing. So I think. Yeah, I mean, we mentioned the cost of potentially the underground car parks, etc. Would there be a different way of achieving that? I don't know. We talk about a housing crisis. There's definitely, obviously, a lot of pressure on us and on councils to be building more housing, but we've also got affordable housing crisis. We need more affordable homes, particularly, and so that's a real shame that we don't have. I mean, we've got a handful of shared ownership schemes, but I would say shared ownership are the least affordable of affordable homes. Unfortunately, I take on board what Barry said about focusing on the one-bedroom houses and the houses with accessibility, but still, I think it's a shame that there's a lot, a real shame, and that's why I'm talking about it quite a lot. There's not more could have been done on that. So ultimately, without kind of repeating what people said, we were in tilted balance. We've got to think about as well if I guess ultimately we've got to use our own judgments, and so I'm still in my own head kind of debating the pros and cons. I guess on one hand, if this is rejected and goes to appeal, then that's potential cost to the council, and that is something that I'm conscious of. And the best of times we need to be careful about our finances. But the other hand, if this is accepted, talks about precedents. I mean, I think I can't help but think this might be used as developers have it to justify this application, that this will then be used by other developers to justify their applications, and that can only and that people will see, well, as long as we can promise to have X number of houses or have certain density, then because of tilted balance, then we'll be able to push this through and this will be accepted. And I think that's in danger of disregarding other aspects that are equally important to residents in terms of affordable houses, in terms of green spaces, in terms of pollution, kind of highways and all the other issues that are very important as well. So I'm just concerned about that. So yeah, quite conflicted, and I will leave it there for now. Thank you.
I think I'm on. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mark, for that useful contribution. Thank you very much. Tricia indicated that you'd like to come back on. You've already spoken once, but this is a debate, and debate means you can come back on things. So, Tricia.
Thank you, Chair. I think this site has definitely been identified for development, but not at any price, I would say. Roy said something, Councillor Aurora said something that had some resonance with me, that, these kind of developments can happen somewhere, but Kingston deserves better. And I think Kingston and Chessington in particular deserves better than this. And I'd like to move to refuse this application on the following grounds. First of all, I'd say the first point would be inappropriate scale and massing. This proposal is overbearing, particularly in relation to number 9, where the existing building line has been ignored. Secondly, I would say the density is too high for development in a suburban area. Chessington South, after all, is mostly greenbelt and could not be described as urban in any way. Thirdly, the lack of appropriate affordable housing, it's far too low at 11%. I've no idea why the developers decided to build such an expensive development, frankly, because the cost of undercroft parking and all the other things that go with it and this level of density obviously increases their costs in association with this. I'd also talk about the potential effect on air quality. We have had highways expert opinion, but I'm very aware, and so are all the local residents and all the other local councillors, that TfL got it completely wrong with the Lidl development, and residents have paid a very high price for that. We've had very, very major congestion because of that. And whilst they do have little, that is, they do have permission to expand their car park. They haven't actually done that yet. So we still have those ongoing issues with queuing traffic. I would also point to the lack of highway infrastructure with regard to the A243 when the cycle lanes haven't been reinstated in a way that they should be if we're truly going to promote cycling as a method of transport. And I just think the numbers we're talking here, yes, it's great that there's a proposal to have 17 3-bedroom homes to replace 8, but the total number of dwellings we're talking about is 43. That's more than 5 times the existing number of dwellings. And I think that's probably what's put the cost up for the builders or the developers. I would also say that the building is out of character with the local area. In an area we've already heard where there are 4-storey buildings. They are some way along, and they were mostly on industrial or brownfield sites when they were built, or they were on a pub that was sold off. So I would say that this development is also out of character with the local area. And it's not carbon neutral either, that's the other thing.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'm still on. I'll just check. I do apologise. Thank you, Councillor Bamford. I think the procedure is that we go to. Can you go on mute? We're getting a lot of feedback. That's thank you very much, Patricia. I think the procedure is, I've just checked with Democratic Services, that we would go to a vote per the agenda, which is with the recommendation to permit. If that obviously if that passes, then that's it. But if that fails, then we would move to a second vote to refuse, and with that we would probably go through the reasons that you've given for refusal, and I'm sure Barry would want to have quite a lot of input into that, as I would. I haven't said anything in the debate on this. In fact, I haven't asked any questions. I haven't really debated it. So I've given this a lot of thought, and I went along to the site this afternoon and spent over an hour walking around the site. And I walked to Chest South Station, I walked to Chest North, I walked along to the Hook Parade, and I timed all those journeys as well. And I'm a slow walker. Density has come up quite a lot. This is, I would have said, slightly rather than greatly over London, the existing London plan density matrix. The new London plan doesn't have such the draft, which is in draft, but it has considerable planning weight at the moment, does not have a density matrix. And we know that we are being pushed for higher and higher density. I could give examples of schemes that this committee has permitted in the last 2 years, where we have permitted schemes that don't just go a little bit over the existing London plan density matrix, but absolutely go through it with absolute. Sam's talking to. We may need to pause, Chair. Sam, you're telling me that we need to pause. Could you tell me? Could you just confirm? I'm getting a message from the Democratic Services. Sorry, I do apologise.
Chair, just to have a brief word about the procedural advice around the voting.
Okay. Do you want to do? Can you do that within the meeting, or do you want to do that just with me?
Well, normally we would propose the motion at the beginning of the before the debate happens, and then get a seconder for it. Yeah. In this instance, we haven't done that. So, what could happen is that Councillor Bamford's motion is the motion on the table. So therefore, we would need a seconder for that motion.
Okay, I take that on board. I might come back to you. I shall carry on saying what I was saying, because obviously it's relevant to the vote, whichever vote we do. Thank you, Sam, for that clarification. So on density, this committee, I'm back to my thread where I was. Yeah, this committee's given permission on other sites where the London plan density matrix has been blown completely out of the water. In fact, we gave permission for 950 flats at the Toby Jug site, and the density matrix would have been way, way lower than that. And we know the argument surrounding that. So I don't think, not only can we not use the density matrix mechanistically, but we have to take note of what the Met is saying, the GLA is saying, and where and what inspectors are saying when applications go to appeal. Is it out of character? There is just along the road at Harrow Close, I think it was, I'm going from memory, a 4-storey block of flats, which, and I don't wish to, I personally think the design on the 11 to 25 Leatherhead Road, this scheme, is quite superior to those, to the 4-storey block of flats at Harrow Close. I'm not trying to say that they're awful or anything, they're perfectly good flats, but I just think the design on this one is better. Sam, if you can, I'm going to speak, Sam, and then I'll let you come back in. If you keep giving me, I keep getting distracted when I keep getting messages coming through. Thank you, Sam. So if you've got anything to say, please say it through the meeting, and then I can take that on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. It was purely just to say that we would need a second of a councillor.
Yeah, I've got that. Yeah, absolutely. I've got that. Thank you. Sorry. So I don't accept that it's so out of character as to be refused, and I think an appeal inspector would absolutely not consider that to be the case. The design I rather like, and I like the fact that it now, in my mind, is now in line with the building line. As in, if you drew a line from the front of the house at number 9 to the front of the house at number 27, this proposed development, it fits that line pretty much exactly. Whereas the existing houses stagger backwards, which mean that when we get back to number, I'm going stagger backwards, going from right to left. So when we get to the adjoining number 9, the existing house is set back quite a long way. So I would have thought, if anything, the amenity value, certainly in the rear garden of number 9, might even be improved from this scheme. With number 27, the other side, it's the other way about, because number 27's got a long garden and it's got houses that will back onto it, albeit they are set in from the boundary by what is now the equivalent of what is now about the width of an existing garden. So with the screening measures that are being put in place, bearing in mind that the screening is principally to the north, it's not exactly to the north, but it's principally to the north of the garden of number 27, that screening will not lead to a drastic reduction in light to the garden I'm talking about of number 27. The height has been mentioned. This committee has given permission for example, a 4-storey block of flats at the corner of Ellerton Road, Ditton Road, Ewell Road. That was back in 2007 when tilted balance did not apply. I don't even think it had been thought of. And that's a 4-storey block of flats immediately adjacent to 2-storey Victorian properties. There was a lot of opposition to it at the time. It got passed and there's a lot of history to it, but it eventually got built, and now I think people accept it as quite a good development, actually. Affordable, I'm not going to go on about that. I would like to see more affordable, absolutely. I'm not happy that it's just shared ownership, but that's what we've got. I don't think I need to rehearse the arguments on that. On the building of the underground car park, that underground car parks do cost a lot to build. This is a semi-underground, because of the way the land slopes up. It's it would be cheaper to build, shall we say, than if the land was dead level and you were building a fully ramped access into a car park which was fully subterranean, if that makes sense, because the way the land slopes up, this underground car park is semi-underground, I would say. But there will be a cost to it, and that will have affected the viability statement. As far as highways and parking's always a thorny issue, and we get applications come to us, and there's nearly always some people that say it needs more parking, and there will be other people that say it needs less parking. I counted up the number of available spaces there at the moment, and of the 8 houses, I'll admit this was an estimation, but I think it's a pretty good estimation. Some of the driveways are pretty long, and I'm not disagreeing with Councillor Stewart's assessment that if she counted the actual cars there at some unearthly hour, I think it was 5 o'clock in the morning, there's 13, I think you could get 29 cars parked there at the moment. So one could argue, well, that argument can go either way, either that therefore, because there's all that parking there already, it means that people are going to want cars, and we've got to provide more car parking for the proposed development. You could also argue, well, if there's 29 spaces there in theory, that is in theory, I'll admit at the moment, that we're not making much of a net increase to 32 spaces plus the 2 motorbikes, and therefore the impact on the highways and is negligible. So it's a tricky argument, and I don't think it's too far wrong. It takes, as far as people living there without a car, it takes, I timed it, I'm not a fast walker. If my wife was walking it, she'd cut several minutes off it, but I've only got small legs and it takes, I'm not that quick. And I walked at a steady but not ridiculous pace, and I used the green button to cross the road as necessary and waited for the green man to come up. And it took me 7 minutes to walk to Chess North Station. It took me 12 minutes to walk to Chess South. So if I lived there, I'd probably go to Chess North, but I think there's better disabled access at Chess South. It took me 7 minutes to walk to Hook Parade, 3 minutes to Lidl, 6 minutes to the health centre, Merritt Health Centre. So where I live in Berridans, it's 7 minutes walk as it happens, 7 or 8 minutes walk to Berridans Station, which is also a half-hour service. Although it's a half-hour service, you obviously time it so that you leave home sort of about 10 minutes before your train's due, or in my case, probably 6 minutes and have to run, but there we go. And when you come back, you don't have to wait at all. So, and there's the buses, I'm not going to go all through the buses. You've got the 71 just round the corner. There's a bus stop outside, but there's just round the corner, you've got the 71 with a 8 to 12 minute service. So it's about every 10 minutes during the day, something like that. Tilted balance absolutely applies to this application. So I think if tilted balance didn't apply, then I'd probably go to, I think I could find, I would come back on the affordable and other things and say we can refuse it. But I think with tilted balance, if this went to appeal, I think the first thing the appeal inspector is going to ask is not the appeal inspector, but the QC for the applicant. The first question would be asked: well, have you got a 5-year housing land supply? Ooh, no, we haven't. And it would go downhill from then. And I think costs would be awarded against us, unfortunately. The costs would be a minimum probably of 200,000, probably $250,000, that sort of figure for this sort of application. So on balance, and it is largely because of the tilted balance position, I'm afraid I absolutely think we need to approve it. With that, I'm going to go back now to Sam, who has stopped sending me messages. Thank you, Sam. I can smile at you and say thank you for that. We've had a proposal to refuse on a number of issues. If we were to take that to a vote, we would need to absolutely bottom out those reasons before we go to a vote. We need a seconder. Is that correct, Sam?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to second the motion that Trish has put forward to refuse? And bearing in mind, Chair, I've been trying to come in. Yes, I will second. So that's, can you not unmute and just say that, Lorraine? Are you having a job unmuting?
No, I'm not having a job unmuting. I just didn't want to disturb your flow, Chair. That is seconded from myself for Trish's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. I'm now going to turn to Barry. The reasons I jotted down from Trisha for refusal, and Trisha, bear with me because I wrote as quickly as I could, but probably haven't picked it up. I've got 6 reasons you've given, and I'd like to hear from Barry. I'm going to read the 6 that I've got, but I might have missed some that you said. So don't. I'm not going through the whole rigmarole, etc. I'm just highlighting them. I've got mass and scale. All I wrote down was number 9. We'd need to come back to that to bottom out the exact wording. And it is basically, I guess, loss of amenity value to number 9, but that needs to be bottom out. Density, affordable housing, highways, we need to be quite specific on all of these. And finally, out of character. So, Barry, I don't know where we go with this. Would you like to give us your views on those reasons for refusal? You've heard what I've had to say and what other councillors have had to say, both for and against, but we've got this motion before us, which has been seconded. So we got there. I've 6 reasons. Would you like to? Oh, air quality. So we've got 7, air quality. I'm not quite sure how that would actually stack up in actual wording, and we would need the wording before we can do this. We need absolute crystal clear wording. So over to you, Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's 2 things I think we would need to cover off before we even got to the wording of any reasons for refusal, and that is for members to go through a balancing exercise. I appreciate that Councillor Bamford and Councillor Dunstan has highlighted 6 areas, but what I haven't heard, and what certainly I would be questioned if I ever found myself in front of an inspector at a public inquiry defending this, if it was refused on those 6 grounds, is what weight was attributed to those reasons. Were any reasons for refusal attempted to be mitigated by conditions? And then, when you get to the tilted balance, were those reasons with mitigation significantly, demonstrably outweighing the benefits? So we have those 6 reasons of 7: mass, amenity, density, highways, character and air quality, some of which are technical areas which we don't have any technical support for a refusal, unfortunately. So highway matters, air quality matters, affordable housing. It would be difficult for me to advise you on what those reasons would be, because I don't have any technical evidence to say there's an air quality issue, there is a highways issue, or the affordable housing isn't in line with policy. The affordable housing offer is in line with policy. So I think before we get to a point of wording these reasons, I would need to know how they've been balanced.
Okay, thank you very much, Barry. That's very useful. In that case, what we're going to do is go through each of the 7 reasons in turn. I think this might take some considerable time, but I'm going to go back to the proposer of the motion, which is Councillor Bamford, and we're going to take these reasons one at a time. And I've summarised it as just mass and scale, but obviously we need to go a lot further than that in the actual reason given. So could you expand on that, bearing in mind what Barry has just said? I'm not considering all the other reasons, this is just on mass and scale.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Barry. I do understand how difficult this is. Of course, I'm very mindful that we're in tilted balance. I do get that. But on balance, I'll just repeat what I said initially, which was I thought this was inappropriate scale and massing. The proposal is overbearing, particularly in relation to number 9, where the existing building line has been ignored, as well as the impact on neighbouring properties. is what I would add if you want a form of words.
Right. So I think that reduces. I had number 9, sorry, as a separate reason, but I think
no, it was all part of the same thing.
That was a genuine misunderstanding on my part.
I beg your pardon, Chair. It would also have an effect on number 27 as well, but not to the same extent with the overbearing, because it was around the building line, particularly, which I know you like, but the residents who've lived in that number 9 for 50 odd years clearly have got used to not having an overbearing building right on their boundary. Okay, thank you. Do we need that reason? I didn't get a chance to write that down, I'm afraid, Barry. I'd need it read back to me before I can consider it properly.
Sorry, Chair, am I okay to come in?
Pardon?
Am I okay to come in? Sorry,
yes, please. I was hoping you would. Please do, yeah.
What I've heard is that the proposal, by reason of its mass and scale, would have an unacceptable impact in terms of overbearing impact on the occupants of number 11, I think it was, or whatever, the number 9 and number 27. Now, what we've heard there is overbearing impact. We now need to see whether there's anything that can mitigate for that impact, and if indeed we've taken any mitigation into account in arriving at that possible reason for refusal. Now, it may look as if I'm being obstinate or putting hurdles in the way, but having come off the back of numerous public inquiries where certainly something like this would end, I just need to know that when I'm read back in that theatre the transcript of what was said in this meeting, that what we've done is we've gone through the process. So yes, you say it's overbearing. Would anything mitigate that? And when we weigh that in the balance, are we still in the same position? So in short, words are: the proposal by reason of mass and scale would have an unacceptable impact on the amenities of neighbouring occupants by reason of overbearing. But I think it might need slightly more debate, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask Democratic Services a question privately, so bear with me. I do apologise for the slight delay. I'm just getting some technical advice from Democratic Services. They'll have seen my message and they will be coming back to me shortly. If we were in a room, we could just, what we do is we stop and we just speak to each other, but we can't do that here, obviously. Thanks. I've had the answer to my question. So, Sam, you can come into the meeting and confirm that what we will do is go through each reason. We'll get Barry to get Barry's comments on it, and then we can vote on that reason whether that is included or excluded from the motion. I think I've summarised that correctly. Sam, can you please confirm that or not?
Chair, I think normally what we would do for this would be that there would be a vote on a general refusal, and then if that is agreed, then you'd move on to voting for the actual reasons for refusal.
Okay, that probably simplifies it a lot. Thank you for that.
Can I come in first? Sorry.
Yes, please, Barry.
I would say before the committee were able to go through a balancing exercise and refuse it, they would need to know what they're refusing it on.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Because otherwise, I would question what are the grounds of the refusal if they come after the vote to refuse. It would. My professional view would be we would need to discuss what's wrong with it before we then conclude it's objectionable in policy terms.
I think that's correct. Is Tim Naylor still in the meeting, please?
Yes, I am, Chair. Yeah, I'm still here. I was switched off and on mute.
Thank you, Tim. We've got Tim is our Assistant Director, Planning and Infrastructure. Could you maybe guide us on the way forward, please?
Well, I think perhaps given that as Mr. Lomax says, there is no technical content in terms of what's been suggested against the context of what's in the report. It might be wise that we take this away and discuss it in further detail and bring it back with further recommendations. Failing that, we could proceed as you've already suggested and go through the various recommendations and take a view on which members of the planning committee want to support that.
Okay, thank you for that, Tim. I am minded to do the second of those options, so we will continue. So we're back to the master.
Mr. Chairman, sorry to interrupt.
Yes, David.
I have put down wanting to speak some time ago, and I would like to comment on what you're about to do.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sorry, David. I wasn't ignoring. Sorry, I wasn't aware of that. But please go ahead, David.
The situation, as I said, and I think as I said before, I didn't like the application, but I didn't feel on the basis of the agenda that there was sufficient grounds in order to turn it down. I'm unhappy about the idea of going through all of those items one by one, because you have to make, if you're going to make a decision, then you have to balance the various items. I would prefer to hear from the officers on all of the items first before I come to any conclusion. The idea of saying, oh, I like that one, or I don't like that one, or the other one, the way you've said it, I find that I would have great difficulty with that, because I think without knowing each one of them, I am in difficulty, because there's a balance. There's a balance between the various items. Some have obviously got a much stronger element than others. So I would find difficulty, if you are doing it the way you're doing, to isolate single items in the way that you're saying, without the officer having gone through all of them, so that I can judge the weight of each individual item.
Thank you for that contribution, David. And I think as the most experienced councillor here, I absolutely welcome that contribution that you've just made. And before I say any more, I know Councillor Edwards wanted to come in, but I am minded to go with what David just said. I think that's a very sensible way forward. Thank you, David. But Simon.
I'm just baffled about what's going on here. Surely, as our Democratic Services Officer has said, in the normal way to deal with this is to vote on the recommendation, and then if a majority of us is in favour of the recommendation, then there is absolutely no need to go through this process, which could take another hour or so, of looking at the potential reasons for refusal. So surely the practical way through this is just to ask the committee whether they are in favour of the recommendation and go through a roll call. We've had a very long debate, and then if they are in favour of the recommendation, that's an end of the matter. Why can't we do that?
I'll come back on that, and just that is absolutely what I was expecting us to do, and what we would normally always do is take a vote on the recommendation. If that falls, then we take a vote on the refusal with the reasons given. David is asked to come back.
Thank you very much. Yes, of course, the procedure is for us to vote on it. However, we've had a very detailed agenda, items on all of those items, and Councillor Bamford has put forward a motion with a number of items which you have said. I don't feel confident because I would like to be able to turn it down, but I don't feel competent in order to make that decision until I've heard from the officers their view on the proposal, because a lot of what Councillor Bamford is saying, while I can understand it, tends to be in conflict with what is being put down on the agenda. And therefore, while I agree with other people, yes, we should go for a vote, but before we go for a vote, I need to hear from the officers so that I can make an informed decision.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn to Barry. Thank you, Barry.
Okay, so I'll go through the areas and then provide my commentary or my position where we are in line with the agenda. So the first issue is one of mass and scale. Now, officers acknowledge in the report that the proposal is higher density and a taller building than it replaces. However, officers consider that it is of a quality which means that it is acceptable in planning terms. The urban design colleagues in the council have made their comments known, and they think that the scheme is acceptable, although we do acknowledge that it is a change, and we do give some moderate weight to that change. In terms of amenity on number 9, or amenity in general on number 9 and number 27, we consider that this proposal meets in all respects the requirements of the supplementary planning document on residential design. The separation distances are sufficient. With terms of daylight and sunlight, there is an impact on the kitchen of number 9. However, we think on balance that is acceptable. And therefore, whilst we do give moderate weight again to that impact on number 9, we will put that on the balancing scales. So far we've identified a couple of moderate issues, design and scale, which an amenity impact we're putting on the negative side, and that's identified in the report. With regards to density, the London plan is clear. It's not to be applied mechanistically. The council is to optimise sites and get the potential out of sites where and when it can, and when it meets with good design and character and appearance. There is an element of subjectivity there, but officers consider that this is a proposal optimises the site and is of a good design. We think the delivery of the number of homes proposed, a proportion of which are affordable homes, carries significant weight on the other side of the scales. Looking at affordable housing, the policy position is clear. Whilst there is a 50% requirement, the policy goes on to say, unless through the submission of a viability report, it's not viable to provide 50, and then you would assess what is viable. We have had an independent assessment of this report that identifies that 0% would be the maximum reasonable amount. We have managed to get 5 units. Now, I appreciate, and I have every sympathy, that those 5 units may not be the best form of affordable units, but they are affordable units. They are above and beyond the policy requirement. We've had that independently assessed, and that would carry significant weight in favour of the proposal. Turning our minds to highway matters, paragraph 109 of the framework is clear. We should only be refusing things on highway grounds if there is an unacceptable impact on the highway network or the residual cumulative impacts of the development are severe. We don't have any backing from our friends and colleagues in Transport for London or from our own highways department, which would demonstrate that we have passed that threshold. Now, that is a technical matter. As I've said, there are some matters of subjective judgment, and then there are matters of technical assessment. The technical assessment's been taken by our colleagues, and they consider that in highways ground, it's acceptable. Character, there is subjectivity involved in character. The subjective assessment of the council's urban design team is that it is acceptable in character terms. Now turning to air quality, I have no evidence in front of me, provided from our environmental health colleagues, that suggests that this scheme is unacceptable in relation to air quality. The proposal makes a contribution to the air quality improvements in terms of its zero net assessment. It needs to make a contribution of around 5,000 to 6,000. I'm not sure of the exact figure, but it makes a contribution. Taking all those issues into account and applying the tilted balance, which we are in tilted balance mode, if we apply the moderate weight to the change in character as a result of this development and apply moderate weight to the impact on the amenities of the neighbouring properties and put that on one side of the balance, and on the other side of the balance we put on the delivery of homes at a time when we can't demonstrate 5 years worth of supply, and we add to that the affordable housing which is above and beyond what policy requires, officers consider that the scheme on a normal balance would be acceptable, but with a tilted balance, those benefits, the adverse impacts that we've highlighted, would not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. I hope I've been of some assistance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And we've had an interesting and long debate on this item, which is not really surprising. What I propose to do is now to put to the vote the motion that has been put forward by Patricia Bamford and seconded by Councillor Dunstan, which is a motion to refuse with the reasons that we've just heard and that Barry has just run through, being mass and scale, density, affordable housing, highways, out of character and air quality. And so with that...
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but...
David.
Can I just ask Barry, he's gone through a lot of the items and basically the tilted balance on the various items, and obviously his recommendation on the agenda was to approve. I'm always difficult to ask this question in an open forum, but can I ask him what he feels would be the position at appeal? Does he feel there's sufficient information, sufficient details on Councillor Bamford's agenda that he would quite reasonably accept to be able to defend this item, or does he feel that it'd be stacked against him?
Thank you, David, for that input, and I'm going to put that to Barry, and then I am going to go to the vote. I think the question is what it's about. I guess if it goes to appeal, you'll be the one, Barry, that's being questioned by their QC, etc. So you've got Councillor Cunningham's question. Have you got a response to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have recommended approval. So in the first instance, it would be rather odd of me to sit here and think that it would stand a chance of appeal. I don't think it would. And the reason I say that is because some of the reasons that have been identified in Councillor Bamford's motion are areas of technical assessment, and we don't have the technical evidence to back those issues up. I think we would be very weak if I were to be wheeled out to defend the council's position on grounds like affordable homes, highways, air quality. Now, that isn't officers shying away from a difficult decision, because you'll be cognizant of the Surrey House public inquiry, where we did have technical evidence to counteract affordable homes, and we went into bat and we were successful. So when we think we have a case, we will back it up. Here, unfortunately, I don't think the evidence supports us. And then when we're looking at the other areas where there are some assessment of subjectivity, it's then about the weight. Now, if members think that it is a finely balanced decision, well, in a world of a tilted balance, a finely balanced decision would be an approval. So if members are thinking it's finely balanced, the tilted balance would suggest it's already tilted in one way. So I hope that goes some way to address Councillor Cunningham's question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to put that to the vote. So we've got a motion, as I say, proposed by Councillor Bamford, seconded by Councillor Dunstan, which is to refuse, given the broad outline of reasons, 6 reasons that they've been put forward. So I'm going to be absolutely crystal clear on this. We're going to put in that to the vote. So if you vote for, you are voting to refuse. If you're voting against, you're voting not to refuse. I hope everybody's absolutely crystal clear on what we're voting for. And it looks as though everybody is. So I'm going to put that to the vote, which means I now turn to Sam, our clerk, to do a roll call of the vote. Over to you, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I will now call up each councillor in turn. Please can you indicate how you wish to vote by saying for, against or abstain. Please can you also confirm that you have been present for the duration of the meeting. Councillor Roy Aurora.
I vote against the motion to refuse, and I confirm I've been here throughout the meeting.
Councillor Bailey.
I vote against the motion to refuse, and I have had breaks in transmission, but they've been accounted for now.
Councillor Patricia Bamford.
Thank you. I vote for the motion to refuse, and I can confirm I have attended the meeting throughout.
Councillor Bainon.
I have been here throughout the meeting. I vote against the motion.
Councillor Cunningham.
I vote against the motion, and I have been throughout the fairly long meeting.
Councillor Dunstone.
I vote for the motion, and I've been present throughout the meeting.
Councillor Edwards.
I've been present throughout the meeting, and I am against this motion.
Councillor Heap.
I've been present throughout the meeting, and I vote against the motion.
Councillor Mole.
I've been present and I vote against the motion.
Councillor Self.
Thank you, Sam. I confirm I've been here throughout the meeting and I vote against the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So that's 2 for, 8 against, and no abstentions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sam. So that means that the motion has fallen. I now propose that we put the motion as was recommended in the report, which is to permit the application. Do I have a seconder for that? There's several hands come up. Would somebody like just to unmute and say, I second it? Thank you. I don't mind. There were 2 or 3 hands came up, but I want to be clear.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much, Simon. So we're now voting on the recommendation to permit the application with all the conditions in the report, etc., and a slight amendment to one condition as was described earlier. Back to you, Sam, I think. Hello, Sam.
Sorry, Chair.
That's all right.
So I will now call up each councillor in turn. Please can you indicate how you wish to vote by saying for, against or abstain. Councillor Roy Aurora.
Thank you. I vote to support this recommendation, and I confirm that I've been here throughout the meeting.
Councillor Bailey.
I vote for, and I've had some difficulties with the internet, but otherwise I've been here.
Councillor Bamford.
Thank you. I vote against this motion to permit, and I confirm I've been here throughout the meeting.
Councillor Bainon.
Yeah, I vote for.
Councillor Cunningham.
I vote for, and I've been here throughout the meeting.
Councillor Dunstone.
I vote against, and I've been present throughout the meeting.
Councillor Edwards.
For.
Councillor Heap.
For.
Councillor Mole.
For.
Councillor Self.
I vote for, and of course I've been here throughout. Thank you.
So, Chair, that's 8 for and 2 against and no abstentions.
Thank you very much, Sam. So that means that the recommendation to permit is agreed. And I'd like to, there are no urgent items authorised by the Chair. You'll be pleased to know that there are no urgent items. Before I close the meeting, I'd like to thank everybody for your patient contributions. And I'd like to thank both the objector for putting his points so eloquently and also the applicant as well. And had this been a meeting held here in the Guildhall, along in the public gallery, I'm sure the public gallery would have been packed. We are cognizant of the fact that there was a lot of opposition to this application, and I know it hasn't gone the way of the objectors, but I don't take that lightly, and I feel that we've voted the way that we feel that we have to vote, given the policy and so on before us. So I'd like to thank everybody, and and including, of course, our brilliant officers who have given us advice throughout both planning and democratic service. With that, I close the meeting on my clock in the Guildhall because it hasn't been chosen. It says 25 to 10, but I think it is in fact 22:34. So I close the meeting and thank you. Goodbye. Good night.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.